Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 73 of Through the Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor, show by show from the beginning. My name is Trevor Dame. The other voice you are about to hear, as always, is the co-host of Through the Years, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, it's crazy, all summer we've been talking about CM Punk, and now all of a sudden all these other wrestling podcasts are now talking about CM Punk. We are so goddamn influential. It's crazy how everyone's just hopping on the bandwagon lately.
Yep, it's all because of us and what we've been talking about, and you're welcome, wrestling fans. But also I will mention it's another heat wave here in New York this weekend, so I will once again be sweating through the oldies, the wrestling oldies, on tonight's episode. So you're welcome again, wrestling fans, for all the hard work that Trevor and I do for you.
Yes, we do make sacrifices, but whether it's sacrificing Saturday evenings or sweating our brains off in I guess everywhere is hot nowadays thanks to the wonders of climate change, but we forego many luxuries, at least a couple.
Yeah, sacrificing Saturday evenings, right. Sure. All right.
Let's stop before we break into crying.
Yes.
And as always, we do the little plug here where we talk about, hey, we're on multiple feeds. So if you're listening to us on the regular Through the Years feed, that's just our show. There's a great feed of pro wrestling podcasts called the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network, where we're just one show on there. If you're listening to us on that, but want like just an uncluttered feed of every single episode where it's easy to get to all our archives, well then just search for Through the Years. You can get to it that way. And as always, we are also still now on YouTube. Our episodes get uploaded there. And I see, Matt, we now have like 4 new subscribers. I just got in our show email. It said something like late in the last, week or month, 900 and something minutes have been listened to. So now there are we've grown from like one person that listens via YouTube to 4. Matt, it's a 400% growth.
It is truly the U-est of tubes. I appreciate all of our YouTube listeners. I'm still not going to post any video content at all along with these episodes. So if that's what you're waiting for, keep waiting, suckers.
You know what's funny? I don't know if you noticed this, but the other day we got an email that's I should probably just talk about this out there, but we got an email saying one of our episodes was flagged as adult restricted.
Ooh,
and it was
I didn't even notice that.
It was the episode, Matt. This is hilarious. It's the At Our Best episode where we spent 3 hours talking about Rob Feinstein.
Oh gosh!
But I think it's just because for that episode I used the picture of a bloody Jay Briscoe as the image, so that's probably what got flagged. It would be a really funny thing if that's not why it was flagged. But
that means someone listened to the whole thing and was like, I gotta flag this. This is inappropriate.
This is for adults only.
It is.
Yeah. You know what? I would say it's PG-13. You want to let your kid get introduced to the World of Wrestling podcast. Let them listen to 3 hours about business turmoil and accusations of underage sex.
And
no.
6 hours is what the length of that episode. And if you want
but only 3 hours are about that. 3 other hours are just good old-fashioned Through the Years reviewing.
Trevor is trying to corrupt your children. Don't let it happen. It's adult restricted.
So I guess the one thing we should also mention quickly between the last episode and this episode is we don't talk about wrestler deaths often just because, that's luckily covering through old Ring of Honor. You don't have to cover many wrestler deaths, and not many apply to us. And obviously other shows do a far better job covering career retrospectives, but I guess we should mention quickly Bobby Eaton, who is someone we have covered Through the Years with the Midnight Express reunion, passed away between the last episode and this episode. Obviously, he did not wrestle for Ring of Honor, but, in the sense, he had an episode dedicated to, a Ring of Honor show dedicated to him in part, and one of the greatest tag wrestlers, I guess, of all, definitely of all time. One of those guys where you can't really go wrong when you talk about just watch him from pretty much anywhere to at least probably the mid-90s when his body starts breaking down. Just great wrestler. And also a reputation for being one of the nicest guys in wrestling.
Yeah, I have nothing to add about Bobby Eaton that many others haven't already said better, but obviously one of the greatest of all time. Rest in peace.
Yes. And there's actually some news to cover between the last episode and this episode. Some things actually happened. The first thing, Matt, is it's not really huge news. It's just a summary of an interview Samoa Joe did, but there's a few fun little tidbits. From the Pro Wrestling Torch, they had a recap. They wrote, Samoa Joe said he signed with TNA instead of further pursuing a deal with WWE because TNA was, quote, a better fit for me, unquote. Joe told the Wrestling Weekly radio show last week that WWE's travel schedule is not something that fits into his current life, and he is able to work various independent promotions and Ring of Honor. On CM Punk's decision to sign with WWE, Joe said Punk was already working dark matches, so it worked out well for him. Joe was critical of WWE for not allowing wrestlers to wrestle on their own. He believes that the wrestlers can simply wrestle and tell a story, but the story doesn't have to be told by the writers. On dropping the Ring of Honor title to Austin Aries, Joe said it was a welcome relief after lugging the 15-pound belt around for a year. I think it's funny, first off, the Joe criticizing the WWE writing. Thank God they finally they fixed that problem, Matt. That's a mid-aughts problem that, they've long since figured out. But the other thing was, it is amazing the number of wrestlers like that when you ask about like, oh, how'd you feel to lose this title? How many of them, their response over the years I've read them or heard them say is just, oh, thank God I don't have to lug that fucking thing around with me. Like, there's like, to a lot of wrestlers, there's no romance about being a champ. I mean, some wrestlers, they really care, and some wrestlers, they're just like, thank God I just don't have to carry this thing around on every show I go to now. It
could also be a case of just looking on the bright side, too. You know what I mean? Like, well, yeah. I'm sad I'm not the champion anymore, but at least I don't have to carry that damn thing around. Do you think, given what Joe said about the, about not going to WWE, do you think there's any scenario where Joe's career works out better if he goes to WWE at the same time as Punk? Like, obviously, there are things I think that there's a level that he could have gotten to that he never did, but do you think that going to WWE would have gotten him there at that time?
I doubt it. Here's what I wonder if you agree with this. I think Joe's career, if he came around this time, would have topped out in WWE. Like, if everything broke right for him, would have topped out at Umaga level, like getting a gimmick like that, having a feud with John Cena, like a notable feud, and probably staying down in the mid card for a few years after that and getting eventually released or something. Like, that's, I kind of feel like the size bias would have gotten to him. And look, like, for a lot of wrestlers, that's not a bad run to have, but I think you and I love Samoa Joe so much and believe he is such a talent that still would have been a gross underutilization of his talents. But to me, I feel like that's where, that era of WWE, I just have a hard time feeling like he gets any bigger than that, even if everything breaks his way.
Here's the one wild card that might make me disagrey with you. The only reason that CM Punk got to stay CM Punk and debut on WWE TV as CM Punk is because Paul Heyman was running OVW at this point, and then he was actually given control over a TV show called ECW and was brought in and was able to bring in Punk into OVW as CM Punk, was able to bring him up to ECW as CM Punk. And do you not think it's impossible that Joe would have gotten the same preferential treatment from Heyman, and that would have allowed him to avoid the Umaga type gimmick? Does that make sense?
It is possible, but in a way, part of me wonders if that almost would have hurt him, because I think that's the kind of gimmick Vince McMahon would like to push. Like, I think if Paul Heyman pushed Samoa Joe on the ECW brand like Samoa Joe's pushing Ring of Honor, I think eventually when it came time to like maybe push him more on the major brands, Vince McMahon would be like, well, I don't want to push this guy in the way they're pushing him. I think what appeals to Vince, as we have seen recently, what appeals to people booking developmental or smaller promotions in the WWE umbrella, and what appeals to Vince McMahon are two vastly different things.
But yes, I agree. But think about what would have happened to Punk if Heyman hadn't been there. Probably would have been given a new character in OVW, right? And probably would not have been brought up to WWE, to the main roster, if at all, with that gimmick. And once he was brought up to the main roster, it really took another 3 years for them to actually start letting him be a character that could like even slightly live up to his potential as far as like mic work and all that stuff. So like, I don't know. It was like Punk got a bunch of lucky breaks. I don't know. I think it's possible that Joe could have gotten some lucky breaks. Now, at the same time, him going to TNA, I think was good for him in a way. He got to really do some legendary things there.
Yeah.
Like that he probably would not have been able to do in WWE for several years. But also might have saved his body a little bit of stress at the same time. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I don't think it's so cut and dry that he would have been a flop in WWE at that time. I guess that's really what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it definitely would have worked out, but I think that some people take for granted that WWE would have not done anything with him, and I don't take that for granted necessarily because of what I just said. Because of what I just said, yeah.
I will say this to your point, Matt, which is Punk and Bryan, like, I never would have guessed they would have reached the heights in WWE that they did. So, like, if I'm wrong about them, it's not hard to imagine that I could have been wrong about Joe if he had gotten signed with them, because I never would have guessed Punk would have been allowed, to get as over as he got in WWE. I never would have guessed that Bryan Danielson would have main evented a WrestleMania, so maybe there is an argument. There was an era. I don't know if I think that era feels like with the NXT news that happened between the last show and this show, like about how they're changing everything there. Like, I feel like that era has passed, but there was a brief wondrous era where it did feel like real great talent could rise further than it had before, even if they had like size deficiencies or weren't the kind of look or background that Vince loved.
But. Yeah, and I'll just say this even, like, and, obviously we'll have many or more years to talk about Bryan Danielson, but I'd say saying that he main evented WrestleMania, that, like, almost understates what he accomplished, right? Like, he was, for a very brief time, the closest thing to, like, a mainstream superstar babyface that the entire American wrestling industry had in the past, like, 20 years. Like, that's, like, I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but, like, go back to the first few months of 2014, like, it was magical, and, like, I don't know, there's just things are possible that you just don't necessarily think are possible in life, and that's a lesson to you all, children.
See, now, this is an episode for the kids with those kinds of uplifting messages.
That's right.
But that actually makes a good transition to my next little news bit from The Observer. Punk was actually already doing some stuff for WWE at this point, even though he was still winding down his Ring of Honor run. The Observer wrote, CM Punk made his TV debut beating OVW wrestler Rob Bagley. He had Mickie James as his manager and gave them an offshoot of the Nitro Molina ring entrance from OVW that never made its way to WWE. I'm told the Punk-James pairing was only a tryout, even though it was taped for television. There were small Ring of Honor and Punk chants. Of course, he didn't wear the Ring of Honor belt. But because most of the crowd had no idea who he was, they were quickly drowned out by loud, boring chants. They also had him change his hair to being jet black with maroon streaks and maroon wrestling trunks. His new look was described as looking like a maroon Larry Zbyszko. His leg drop off the top finisher looked good. So apparently, Matt, now I couldn't find this anywhere else but this one website, and I don't know if I trust this, but I was kind of searching for more information on this match after reading that. And one website claims this was taped for Sunday Night Heat, but never aired on Heat because WWE didn't like how it went.
It definitely didn't air on Heat.
Yeah.
I feel very confident using that word definitely, even though I have not checked.
But this does have all the hallmarks of like a tryout that didn't stick because, he does not have a long-term pairing with Mickie James. He does not use, I think, certainly by the time he gets to the ECW brand, a top rope leg drop as a finisher. And I don't know if he ever looks, Matt, like a maroon Larry Zbyszko.
No, this is definitely where like my whole Heyman thing comes in. Like Heyman had just started being the booker of OVW, I think, pretty shortly before this. And like once Punk actually debuts on OVW TV, he's pretty much just CM Punk. Like he wears more eyeshadow, but like other than that, he's CM Punk, and the main thing he does over that year is in OVW is he has a feud with Brett Albright, and that's pretty much how he goes. So, but no, Mickie James is never with him. on TV, and he's not a whole new character. He's CM Punk.
I still can't get over Maroon Larry's.
What color is Larry Zbyszko
then? Beige. Next up, going to the PW Torch. Ring of Honor is not only about to lose CM Punk, its current world champion, but also the wrestler many predicted would end up world champion within a matter of weeks, James Gibson. Gibson, who wrestled in WWE as Jamie Noble, had been a standout wrestler in Ring of Honor this year, winning over fans with stellar in-ring performances. WWE apparently heard of Gibson's standout performances and decided to bring him back. He was released last year after filing an inappropriate medical claim under his WWE insurance related to steroid usage. Additionally, WWE has also agreed to terms with Brian Spanky Kendrick to bring him back. Spanky has worked several Ring of Honor events this year between Japan tours. The signings may be WWE's attempt to keep TNA from signing potential strong X Division wrestlers. WWE may also be attempting to strengthen its cruiserweight division by this fall before TNA debuts on Spike TV. I have one other note on this. I just have to grab it because apparently I am bad at setting up the podcast. Let me just see here. This is from the Observer's version of it. Let me just see, because I just very professional by me. But the Observer wrote
I'll sing a song while you're waiting. No, just kidding. Sorry.
The Observer wrote, Jamie Noble and Spanky both agreed to return this past week. Very strange the company cuts so many low-level guys and then hires two people who for what would likely be low-level positions. The way we heard it was Vince McMahon realized they were short on cruiserweights, and since the Mexicools are favorites of his, they needed new opponents for them.
That's definitely how it worked out. Remember those feuds with Kendrick and Jamie Noble against the Mexicools? We all remember that, right?
John Laurinaitis called two guys he already knew from previous tenures with the company. Regarding the Mexicools, there's some trouble due to Psychosis getting into some hot water behind the scenes and Juventud, of all people, being told that one more incident means they're all gone. In the case of Jamie Noble, TNA was wanting to bring him in when they got TV in October, although most feel the two things aren't related, since Noble's calls to return, even after word he had been talking with TNA was out, had still fallen on deaf ears until this week. Noble had turned down previous TNA offers because he was told as long as he didn't go to TNA, he could have his WWE job back once the situation blew over. Noble was originally fired when he got an internal infection, apparently from shooting steroids into an infected site on his butt cheek. He sent the medical information, figuring apparently that shooting steroids was part of his work, so it was a work-related injury to WWE. So he sent it to WWE. The problem was, that meant WWE had no plausible deniability that one of its wrestlers was using illegal drugs, steroids. Now, you may laugh about this because a high percentage of WWE wrestlers use steroids, but they know enough to keep it quiet from management because their contracts specifically state using any illegal drugs is a contract violation. WWE has the right to pretend and doesn't test much because it doesn't want to know. Jim Ross did test an OVW at times, although there has not been a test in OVW since he left the position.
Wait! Who are you just quoting that said WWE has no, quote, right to pretend?
That's Dave Meltzer.
Is that a right? What amendment is that?
That's the 82nd amendment. But when WWE does know, it has no choice but to act. Basically, the feeling on Noble was always he was a good worker and employee, even though the steroid thing wasn't his only black mark. But it was the only one that got him fired. Spanky quit on his own, and it was always figured he'd go to TNA, but it never happened because he was unwilling to give up his Japanese deal. He was content to work very few indies and save himself for 0-1. When that company shut down, he went to 0-1 Max. Since they are on a much tighter budget, they weren't booking nearly as many foreigners, so his income was way down, and TNA has a hiring freeze unless it's for a major exception until TV starts. So he likely couldn't get a deal there right now.
Well,
going back,
Brian Kendrick has the right to pretend that TNA hired him.
His going back kind of surprised me though, because he was so unhappy at the end of his run there. So A lot to unpack there, Matt. Obviously, yeah. So this was, a big story around this time. All of a sudden, everyone was preparing for Punk to leave. All of a sudden, Gibson and Spanky are going to go. Not that Spanky was involved in a major way in 2005. He was kind of just popping in and out between his 0-1 commitments. But, yeah, so many things to mention. The right to pretend, Dave's vague comment, I don't always talk about that. That was not the only black mark James Gibson had. More clarification on that story that we mentioned, I think, when James Gibson first came to Ring of Honor and someone helped us. We forgot why he was fired and someone helped. But
that was Justin Shapiro who helped.
Yes, Justin Shapiro did. And, of course, Dave going into it in more detail there, which, again, still a crazy story of James Gibson gets a medical problem injecting steroids and then feels like he should be able to file a claim with WWE and then we have to fire you because you just admitted you did steroids. But yeah, it's sad that we just talked, Matt, about about CM Punk and Bryan Danielson succeeding in WWE and whether Joe could or couldn't. I feel like James Gibson and Spanky are the flip side of that coin. It's what happens when everything doesn't break your way in this era, when Paul Heyman isn't in your corner.
Yeah, I bet if Jamie Noble went to OVW and then to ECW, he would have had a better run on the main roster.
Yeah, there was that brief moment where Spanky had a tiniest bit of a push as the Brian Kendrick.
And he had that. He was a tag champion with London, so his second run probably ended up getting him more high-profile matches than his first. Remember when London first debuted in 2003, and it was just him and Spanky getting completely destroyed by Brock Lesnar? Oh, good times.
I was just going to say I thought this is what you were going to say. Someone just reposted this clip the other day, I think after the NXT news of, for those who are listening to this way in the future, we're recording this days after the big story was that, WWE is kind of restructuring NXT. They fired a lot of people from there, and that they're likely turning it more into an old school developmental for young green guys and big guys and all that stuff. But anyway, so I guess in the light of that, to kind of laugh at Triple H, someone posted a clip of Triple H just completely squashing Paul London and Brian Kendrick.
When they were tag team champions, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so yeah, that's what they're going back to. But yeah, it's especially sad when, you got James Gibson on this run, who's probably truthfully saying, this is, some of the best times I've ever had wrestling. And, I've gotten to be myself and this has meant so much to me. And, this is where the real wrestling is. And then he's going back, cause hey, it's obviously better money, but, he's going back to a place where he's not going to be utilized to the best of his abilities. And, but we got a few shows left with these two.
Yeah, so, just on the bright side, not having to carry that belt around, at least James Gibson got this run in ROH so the world can look to it and say, this is what this guy could have brought to the table if he was given the chance to. Because I think without the ROH run, no one really would have known for sure. There was really nowhere else where he was able to have these kinds of high-profile matches in his entire career, right? So, So this, I'm sure still he looks back on this ROH run as one of the highlights of his career, at least in terms of in the ring stuff.
And finally, one last bit before we get to the show, I found another Wade Keller article thing, and I just feel like Wade was really going in some directions with. I do not think I will use my fancy Wade Keller voice that you enjoyed so much, Matt, but I will read. So this is just an
No, do it.
This is just an excerpt from a longer column where Wade during this period wrote a column about basically saying right now there seems to be a lot of pseudo shoots going on and work shoots, because he talked about how you had the Hulk Hogan Shawn Michaels SummerSlam feud at this point, which was building up some kind of Shawn Michaels was clearly not in part of it was some real feelings probably that he did not love Hulk Hogan, and that was being worked into it. We had the Edge Matt Hardy thing going on, and he also decided to lump in the CM Punk storyline, the Summer of Punk storyline with that. So this is the excerpt of that article where he talks about Ring of Honor. Ring of Honor is attempting to accomplish something similar. Gabe Sapolsky and CM Punk seem to be trying to blur the lines, hinting that Punk is refusing to drop the Ring of Honor title before going to WWE. It sounds a lot like the old-style promoting tactic of the foreign villain threatening to take the belt back to his country if he beats the good guy champ. Are Sapolsky and Punk attempting to just keep everyone on their toes so no Ring of Honor fans really know the difference between truth and fiction? Or is it an attempt to genuinely fool them because they've grown tired of trying to cater to the vocal know-it-alls who dare second-guess their product? If it's the latter, it has almost no chance of working given the current Ring of Honor fan base. Ring of Honor fans feel a great sense of ownership of the promotion. Ring of Honor events are smaller, more intimate. Fans feel they're more part of a clubhouse than a stadium. Therefore, they don't want to be treated as outsiders or just fans. They want to be respected and told the truth. They also became fans of Ring of Honor because it stood for something different than the higher budget alternatives with bigger name wrestlers. Ring of Honor was about clean finishes, world-class work rate, standing ovations for a great sequence, and an unstated handshake agreement with the promoters and wrestlers that they treat their fans with more respect and dignity than Vince McMahon or WCW management had over the years. Sapolsky is now not only trying to play his fans as marks by using old-style means to get heat on heels, but Punk is criticizing fans for their rejecting of that approach, telling them to go watch baseball if they don't like Ring of Honor's evolution. When promoters and wrestlers start telling their audience what they want and act as if they know better than the fans themselves, they're doomed. That said, nobody knows the Ring of Honor fans better than Sapolsky and Punk do. Perhaps they're willing to turn away a few longtime loyalists if they feel it's necessary to change up the style to draw a larger base of fans in the long run. But in the meantime, they shouldn't be offended if the fans who know the most don't eat up the pseudo-shoots in the same way as the mainstream majority of WWE fans. Ring of Honor fans pride themselves on not being suckers. They'll walk away from the promotion first. For WWE, there may be enough fans who think they know more than they do to make pseudo-shoots actually pay off at the box office. For Ring of Honor, attempting the same thing has the potential to backfire and turn off some of their core followers. Matt, I mean, I think Wade sometimes at this era of Ring of Honor was just wading deeper into waters he didn't swim in often enough, because I think he's just he's over-exaggerating a lot of things here. He's exaggerating a lot of things here. And even just like the idea, like he's acting like this is the first time Ring of Honor had ever tried like a pseudo work shoot or anything. Like maybe he did not watch the Ring of Honor riot and then the two horrible attempts to recreate the riot, which in itself was a work shoot, or various other things Ring of Honor has done already up to this point in their history. The idea that like, oh, these fans, they're going to reject Ring of Honor, they're insulting their intelligence. Like, no, I mean, I don't know.
Well, first of all, we all did used to like to pretend when we went to ROH shows that we were in a clubhouse, and that was our right. We had the right to pretend that we were in a clubhouse.
Matt, I know sometimes when you were like in the Manhattan Center in the New York Hotel or something, you were like, is this a stadium? I'm just going to pretend it's a clubhouse, but I could think it's a stadium. Like
but please, I want you to acknowledge that we had the right to pretend that. we fully had that right. Yeah, I mean, I think, Wade wasn't the only one exaggerating what this was at the time. If you read Meltzer, there was a little bit of that too. And if you actually just go back and watch it, like, it was just a wrestling angle. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like, and I guess, like the way they presented it before the live shows was a little bit more worked shooty, but like any of the DVDs you watch and it's like, this doesn't feel like a work shoot. It feels like CM Punk is being a heel, like it, you know what I mean? Like, you don't really see the work shoot elements when you watch the video product, right? Like, it's just an angle.
Yeah, like, and obviously some of that stuff unfortunately is lost to time because a lot of the stuff on the archive.org where I can go back and look at like the official Ring of Honor website and stuff, it's been just so much of this stuff is not saved. But stuff like we mentioned, I think on a recent episode, someone said something like on the website, Gabe was acting like CM Punk was threatening to not do business behind the scenes and all that stuff. Like you just said, none of that shows up if you just watch the DVDs, or this comment, it must have happened somewhere about Wade saying that CM Punk said that if the fans don't like Ring of Honor instruction, they can just go watch baseball. Like you just said, going to your point, if you just watch the DVDs, it just feels like a pro wrestling angle. The more egregious stuff that's maybe bothering some people is not something that made its way into the on-screen product.
In fact, CM Punk does commentary on this particular show. Like what a work shoot. This company is like trying to act like this guy's trying to leave with the company. And then they're also just like, hey, but if you want to sit in on commentary, that would be cool. And we could just be mad at you on commentary. Like, clearly it's just an angle. Like, so everybody needs to chill out 16 years ago. Chill out 16 years ago. That's what I say.
And that finally brings us to the show we are covering today. The Homecoming took place July 23rd, 2005 at the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in front of a reported crowd of 550 fans.
By the way, I'm not going to let go of this right to pretend thing. This is going to be my new thing until I forget about it. Possibly before the show is over, but possibly not.
Yeah, like, I get what you're saying, like, too, like, I thought it was weird when I was reading that, too, like, WWE has the right to pretend the wrestlers aren't doing steroids. Like, well, if they're kind of aware of it, like, that'd be like if I was aware of a murder, I don't have the right to pretend I didn't see a murder. I have, like, a legal obligation to report the crime. Like, You
snitch? No, just kidding.
I'm going to give me stitches, Matt.
Yeah, but also I'm just thinking of now, like, if there was a faction called the Right to Pretend that feuded with the Right to Censor, who would be in it? Would it be like Alexa Bliss?
I was about to say Bray Wyatt, Alexa Bliss. That could be the name of their stable. They're just like, everything's possible when you use your imagination, and then some weird, like, doll thing happens. But
That's right.
So on this show, things that we'll just have to pretend or imagine because we don't get to see is this was the first show that started a trend that Ring of Honor would do pretty regularly going forward, which would be to let the students wrestle a few dark matches that did not make tape before the proper show started. So we get Smash Bradley beating Pele Primo. We get Matt Turner and Shane Hagedorn defeating Bobby Dempsey and Derek Dempsey. And we get Davey Andrews defeating Antonio Blanca. And then, Matt, there's another dark match, not Ring of Honor students. El Generico defeats Kevin Steen. And it does not, as crazy as it seems, folks, it does not make the DVD. I guess, the DVD was pushing 3 hours as it is. Something has to get cut. And I guess that tells you, like, where these two guys were on their first little mini run of Ring of Honor, where they're the match that gets cut,
That match also didn't go well. I was at the show, by the way.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yes. This is my third ever Ring of Honor show. And that match didn't go very well. I don't remember so many of the details, but it didn't go super well, and it was the end of the first run of Kevin Steen and El Generico, if I am not mistaken. They don't show up again until 2007, I don't believe.
No, they do, Matt.
Oh, 2006. I know that.
No, there's still some matches I think they have in 2005, I think.
What show? Or the Buffalo show?
I know Kevin Steen wrestles a 4-way, and El Generico wrestles something as well. I can look it up. Just give me a sec.
Because I know Generico comes back in late 2006. I remember that. And Steen comes back in February 2007. I remember that. But I did not. I guess it would have to be the Buffalo show. That's the only show I could think of that they would have appeared on after this. The Buffalo, the Dragon Gate invasion that takes place in August of 2005, if I am not mistaken. But the show on the match on this night, like I said, it's so long ago. I don't remember the specifics of like botches and stuff like that. But I remember the match. The match didn't go well. And the thing is, there were some other matches on this show that didn't go particularly well, and they made the DVD. So so you're right. I'm sure a lot of it also has to do with just where Steen and Generico were on the pecking order in ROH at this point in time as well.
So, Matt, you were wrong, but then you were right and saved yourself. You kicked out at 2.9 because, in fact, the one show I can find that they both work on in 2005 after this is the Buffalo show, is Dragon Gate Invasion. Kevin Steen does a 4-corner match with Chad Collier, Davey Andrews, and Jimmy Jacobs, and Homicide wrestles El Generico, actually, on that show.
Okay,
a 14-minute match.
So that's the end of their run in ROH in 05.
So this was almost the end. But
you're right. But like that, the match between the two of them was not meant to be a dark match on this show. It was, it was part of the main card, and it got it got cut. And like you said, it did, like the DVD did run long, and these were guys that were not involved in much stuff, but still you'd think those two against each other would be good enough that you'd squeeze it on there somehow, but it wasn't their best match against each other, unfortunately.
Yeah, it just seems like they were snake bit in a lot of different ways. Like the booking did not help them. Some of their performances did not help them. It just, it's because these guys were doing great, well-received work in other promotions and even showed flashes of it, I think, on this run. But that El Generico Austin Aries match we just watched was pretty good, and it just didn't go their way. But they will have their day, Matt. We open on the DVD with a shot of the Ring of Honor World title. We zoom out to see it's being held by Allison Danger backstage, and that next to her is the man who stole it at the last show. It's Christopher Daniels. Daniels says he didn't steal the belt because he feels he deserves the title. He says he just stole it because he feels he just deserves a shot to be the champ. He says if circumstances were different, he might have gone about this all a different way. If Samoa Joe or Austin Aries were still champ, he'd work his way up the ladder like everybody else. But Daniels says Punk forced his hand by threatening on every show to just walk out with the belt, go to Titan Towers, and hand it to Vince McMahon and give him a big ol' hug. Daniels says if you think he's going to let that happen, you're out of your mind. And a very, quick, solid, good promo. I mean, nothing amazing, but it's just a good thing to kind of – I like that they, that Daniels went out of his way to kind of go like, yeah, I did. He's aware of the idea of like stealing a title is a heelish thing to get a world title shot. But you being a heel forced me to do the heelish thing. And if it wasn't for that, I would have just done this the good, honorable way. It's
still another example of what I complained about on the last show, though. Allison Danger just standing there making faces, not saying anything like she would have in the old days. It's a thing, and it bothers me.
Matt, you act like she's just a prop to stand around and then come in late to get punched in the face during a match for no good reason at the end of the match. Like, that's not going to happen tonight. Come on, she's going to have something to do. Something really important. Surely, Matt. Surely.
I mean, I will say this. I'll say it more later. She does do something important during that match besides what you said. So we'll talk about it later.
Elsewhere backstage, we find Alex Shelley at the top of a row of stairs with his gear bag. I guess the implication being that he is still, at this point, like 6 months of this, not welcome the Ring of Honor locker room and having to get dressed like in stairwells, apparently. Shelley says, once again, the wrestling world is abuzz with news only he knows. The internet, Ring of Honor management, Ring of Honor wrestlers, dirt sheets, Samurai TV. Everyone wants to know who Shelley's mystery partner is going to be tonight. Shelley says he could have gone to his past, picked someone he knows who has been in Ring of Honor before, like Chris Sabin or P.D. Williams. He could have gone to his present and brought in a guy like Rhino or Sabu. Or he could have looked to the future and brought in someone that's hot off the presses like a Charlie Haas. Shelley says, though, if he's learned one thing, loose lips sink ships, and this ship is going to sail. And then the camera pans down to Shelley's shirt, which does in fact say, loose lips sink ships. So I have to think, he got the shirt and then decided, I'm going to make a promo out of this. Matt, I think this promo is most notable for the fact that hot off the presses and Charlie Haas were used in the same sentence probably for the first and only time in history.
Wow, shots fired at Charlie Haas.
Boom, boom. Got you, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean, it was a fine promo to get over the storyline that they are going to spend a decent portion of the show focusing on, so...
And that brings us to the opening match, a 4-corner survival match. Spanky defeated Azrael and DeRanged and Nigel McGuinness in 16 minutes, 7 seconds when he pinned DeRanged after he hit the sliced bread number 2. Matt, I looked this up. This is Azrael's third straight 4-corner match. I think it's his fourth 4-corner match in his last 5 matches. And in his last 6 matches, he had one singles match apart from those 4-corner matches and a 6-way match. So, if Trent Acid was, except he hasn't won none of them. So if Trent Acid was like, remember they briefly did that gimmick in 2004 where he was the king of the multi-man matches? Is like Azrael the court jester of the multi-man matches where he is just in them all but doesn't win a single one of them? I don't know.
Isn't it weird that people remember this as ROH trying to push Azrael for a little while? Like, clearly that was not what was happening, right? Like, there's no way that you look back on this and it's like, well, yeah, this guy's getting a push.
I mean, they broke him out of the the tag act, and clearly he was getting used on he was getting to wrestle in these 4-ways more prominent opponents than, I mean, certainly he's in a better spot right now than, say, Dixie, who isn't on the card. But yeah, it's almost like they almost wanted to push him, and then halfway through, after they booked him for the shows, almost decide like, maybe we don't want to push him, so let's just throw him in these matches.
Yes, and I do agree. He's in a better position than people who are not booked at all.
Yes.
I do agree.
I know that's a bold take I have, but that if you disagree, of course, you have the right to pretend. But yes. What did you think about the match? I don't want your pretend thoughts. I want your real thoughts about this match.
I really thought this match was pretty disappointing. And when I say disappointing, I mean considering like Spanky and Nigel McGuinness were in it. I typically like DeRanged when he's in these multi-man matches and has a lot of like shtick going on. And, Azrael can do some cool stuff in some of these matches. And I don't know. I just didn't think this match clicked. First of all, we should mention Punk is on commentary, which, like I said, is weird from a storyline perspective. He's leaving with the belt, but also, like, we're going to hire him to do commentary for a few matches.
And I believe this is the final show, for the little trivia factoid, I think this is the final show he ever does Ring of Honor commentary for.
Yes, and his shtick here is to just be, like, the most over-the-top heel he's ever been. Just clowning on everybody, just like everyone on the roster, saying stuff like, man, if Nigel is your top star when I split, what is ROH going to do? Meanwhile, at a certain point, Nigel does become their top star. But he also says that Spanky will never, ever be a champion in ROH, and that is true. He was
yeah,
not.
I was like, ooh, that's hitting close to the bone, Punk. You don't realize. Maybe Punk thought differently, but like, no, that's true. That becomes true.
I mean, Spanky is a title holder in WWE, which is, I guess, probably better, right? Like, as far as, but like, still, he also says some very politically incorrect stuff about Nigel and Lacey that I won't repeat, but yeah, it's that's sort of his thing here. Punk was very politically incorrect on commentary. It's hard to remember how much he was like that. But Prazak obviously is completely indignant whenever Punk says it's his last night, because at this point, even the ROH guys are like, "We don't believe you. You keep saying that, and you keep coming back," which I appreciate that they're not like playing dumb anymore. They're not. They've decided to waive their right to pretend that CM Punk is leaving after each show. Which I appreciate. But, like, yeah, the match itself just, like, I don't know, there's some good stuff, but, like, DeRanged and Azrael are methodical, which is not against each other, which is not their strong suit. I guess, like, early on when they get in against each other, there's, like, a couple of mistime moments, so DeRanged just, like, grabs a headlock, and they just work slowly for a while, and the crowd is pretty quiet. So like I mentioned, I was at this show, and this is the third ROH show I was at, and the first two were in like cool, like unique venues. The Supper Club, which was this like nightclub, and then the New Yorker Hotel, which was this ballroom with a chandelier and stuff, and the most intense crowd heat that I can think of in any venue. And I thought every ROH show was just going to be like, have this cool vibe. And like, I grew to love the Philly National Guard Armory, the Pennsylvania National Guard Armory as a venue. But on this night, the first time I went there, I was like, oh, it's a gym. It's just like a sweaty gymnasium. And it felt a lot less impressive, I have to say. Like, I was like, oh, this feels like an indie show. And like I said, I don't have that feeling about that venue now. I ended up really loving the venue. But on this night, it just, it wasn't super packed, and it just didn't have a great atmosphere, especially for these early matches. And you could tell watching this match on DVD that just like people are just not into it. And, they try, they go slow for a while, but they try to do a lot of spots where everyone's picking on DeRanged. And, this is another match where it's like Nigel doesn't really wrestle like a heel here. He's chasing DeRanged to the back. Everyone is. And like, he's just working a match. Like he's just a guy. Like nobody's really putting their best feet forward. Spanky has a haircut, by the way, like a short haircut. I guess maybe that's WWE related. Like maybe WWE wanted him to get one because the timing is interesting, right? But otherwise, yeah, there's just not much to the match. Like the final sequence, Deranged hits a springboard DDT, and then they do a Tower of Doom spot where Nigel powerbombs Deranged, who superplexes Azrael into Spanky. And I think that was actually unintentional. I don't think Azrael was supposed to go into Spanky. And then Spanky just pops up, so he doesn't really sell it. Hits the sliced bread on Nigel. Then Azrael hits a Cobra Clutch backbreaker on Spanky. Then Deranged goes for a West Coast pop, but Azrael tries to reverse that into an electric chair. Spanky stops that with a super kick to Azrael, and then hits the sliced bread on Deranged for the win. That last sequence was all right, but it was the final 45 seconds of the match. The rest of it was just kind of plotting, and the crowd was quiet, and just I don't know. I just felt it was pretty disappointing. Wasn't smooth, not good crowd reactions. I thought kind of mediocre.
I feel like I'm barely above you on this match, but I feel like the difference is I just feel the way about this match I feel about most four corner matches where it feels like you were expecting something better just based on the talent. But I've seen so many of these four corner matches where the talent was so good and it just turns out to be a match of this quality of a 2 3/4 star match.
Yeah, I think I would rate this way lower than that.
Oh, wow. See, I
one star, 1.5 stars maybe.
Wow. See, I think the action is decent here. It's just, it doesn't really, I wrote in my notes, I think the same thing I write for a lot of these four corner matches, which is it's decent action that doesn't really go anywhere. There's a couple dives. There's a scrambling and somewhat exciting and sloppy four guys in the ring doing stuff at the finish section. And as always with these matches, I almost always come away from a match with this kind of lineup saying, I would have rather seen a singles match with any two of these guys than what they gave to me here. This always feels like this is another one of those four ways where it feels like less than the sum of its parts. And before I get to my thoughts on the match, Matt, other than that, I just want to say I am going to clip you saying I really grew to love the Philadelphia National Guard. I'm just going to send that. I'm going to cut out the armory part, and you will be used in military recruitment video you ads. Matt Feuerstein says, I really grew to love the Philadelphia National Guard.
Gonna ruin my Twitter left credibility? Is that what you're going to
do? Enroll today, folks. But so yeah, there was a little bit of sloppiness. You mentioned some of the highlights. I did like Deranged did a couple cool satellite head scissor spots. There was one where he does the satellite head scissor, but he kind of turns it into a submission where he's kind of clamped around the guy's head and grabbing an arm or something. And then Azrael spins him around in the other direction and then drops him into a backbreaker, which I thought was kind of neat. Spanky gets his leg worked on. He sells it decently. He does a stinger splash, which it was just, hey, Spanky doing a stinger splash. I guess my biggest takeaway from this match, well, one, Nigel barely does anything in this match for the first 10 minutes, which was kind of disappointing because I like Nigel. But also, I guess my biggest takeaway was Deranged is the guy here that, Deranged is almost on his way out of the company, and it felt like this match was all about him. I think just his natural charisma, even though he didn't do necessarily anything special, just within the opening minutes, the match becomes all about Spanky and Nigel especially, but also Azrael, like you said, chasing him to the back, just desperately wanting to get their hands on him because he's just so good at being an annoying little shit. And I just thought we're fans of Deranged on Through the Years. There was untapped potential for him either in Ring of Honor or somewhere else because he did have a good charisma that I think could have worked in a lot of different ways in a lot of different places. And again, the fact that he's in a match with this level of talent, not getting a push, and somehow it still felt like he was the focus of the match, I think that says something for him. And Matt, my favorite highlight of this match, though, my last note is there is a moment. This should tell you the quality of this match, and this is my favorite spot. But there's a moment where Azrael gets whipped into the ropes, and Deranged is on the apron. He's an illegal man. He does a blind tag where he just slaps Azrael on the back as he hits the ropes. And Azrael, who doesn't see it, it's almost as if he does not know it's a blind tag. He thinks maybe Deranged just hit him with a spot because he sells this blind tag like it's a huge strike. He drops to his knees and grabs his head. It was just a blind tag, but he must have thought, did Deranged hit me with a move? Oh shit, I gotta sell it. And it's no, it was just a tag. But to me, that's the most memorable spot of this match. So that's probably not a great sign.
No, it is not.
So next we cut to something that was memorable for not good reasons. We cut to Gary Michael Capetta in the ring. He tells us he needs to address the controversy regarding Prince Nana's recent treatment of Jade Chung, and he says he has a ruling from Ring of Honor to tell him about. So Nana and Jade at this point come to the ring. Nana's in a fancy new sparkly sequin-covered jacket with a big butterfly on the back. Very, very fancy. I don't know why there's a butterfly on it, but there is. Gary tells Nana that his actions towards Jade are disgusting, and Ring of Honor agrees with him. From this moment on, Nana cannot pull her hair, he can't tug her around by the arm, and he can't physically abuse her in any way, which you would hope would just have been a lot to begin with. This gets some cheers in the crowd, but also some boos, which, tugging my collar there. Gary says if Nana does not abide by this, the entire embassy will be fired from Ring of Honor. Nana calls Gary an old douchebag, but says he will abide by these new rules. Nana then tells Jade that he made her who she is, but if she wants to leave a legacy that is going to build with the embassy, she can go back to Thailand, where she's from, which I thought was weird because Nana already said on a different show that she actually was from Vietnam, so Nana can't even remember his fake storyline. Anyway, Nana asks her if she wants to go back to a little hutch where she's a babysitter to her mom's 11 other kids. Nana says he'll buy her a ticket if that's what she wants. Jay grabs the mic and she says, he's right. Things at home are really bad and I'll stay with the embassy. And then the fans actually cheer this. They like that she's going to stay with Nana. Nana says she did the right thing and he touches her cheek. He then brings out Killer Cruel, who has a piece of clothing for her that will cover her from head to toe so no one can see her body. And this draws boos from the crowd. They don't like this.
This got the most boos of anything that was happened in this segment, was when they covered her up.
Nana isn't happy, Jade isn't happy, but Nana gets in her face. He threatens to send her home. They wrap this large sheet of cloth around her and just seem to affix it to her by giant grocery bag clips or something. It looks like they're just clipping it so it stays wrapped around her. It's not even really looking like a piece of clothing, more than just a piece of cloth. But after that, they then pull out a dog collar and a leash. Gary at this point tries to object to this, but Nana gets in his face. Gary then says, I can't stand this anymore. I'm out of here. And but on his way out of the ring, he reminds Nana that if he lays a hand on Jade, he's done. Gary leaves as Cruel, then puts the leash on Jade Chung. Nana asks her to open the ropes for him and Cruel to leave the ring, but she's on one of those kind of dog leashes where if you don't press the button, the leash doesn't let out more. So she tries to walk, but the leash is too short and she gets tugged on and hurts herself.
Yeah, I just want to correct you. That it was an intentional point of Nana telling Chung to walk forward so he could intentionally pull it back. It wasn't like an accident. He pulled on it.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Absolutely. And then at that point, the crowd chants asshole to end the segment. So before we talk about it, the Observer had a little thing from the notes to talk about this. Dave wrote, they tried to do an angle apparently playing off the Hassan controversy when Gary Capetta came out and told Prince Nana that Ring of Honor told Nana he could no longer put his hands on Jade Chung or he'd be fired. So they got one of those long dog leashes you control by punching a button, and he put her on a leash. Said to be equivalent to a Diva Search segment. I like that. That's I guess shows you maybe how bad the Diva. Honestly, Matt, I think this is worse than the Diva Search segment, but that's just me.
I don't really see how this was a play on the Muhammad Hassan.
I don't know either. If just anything controversial at this point was supposed to be a play on that, but that clearly isn't. It's its own thing.
Yeah.
These segments we've talked about a lot. They're gross. I think the thing that always makes these segments worse is when the crowd is kind of playing into the worst instincts. So like you said, they're only really mad when the chance to see Chung scantily clad is put in jeopardy. They're actually kind of into it. At least some, not all of the crowd, but some of the crowd seems to be kind of into her current role as being abused by Prince Nana. I guess there were some boos, but there were also some cheers when, Gary told her he couldn't do it to her anymore, but there were some people in that crowd, I'm sure not you, Matt, who booed, who were like, no, we like this. You're ruining our fun thing. But yeah.
Yeah. To me, this was the worst one yet. they, it's just horrible. I mean, you can appreciate at least that, like, the ROH is making it out that this was something that they were appalled by. But yeah, I think that they knew how the crowd was going to react to this because it was 2005 and it was an indie crowd, that they were going to cheer the worst things. They were going to cheer the dog collar, which they did. That they were going to boo her being covered up, which they did. Nana leaned into the racist aspect by making up this whole thing about Thailand and the little huts and the grandma having 11 kids and she's the official babysitter. That's clearly just racist, right? And then the violent yanking of Chung by the dog collar. It was just... And then, like you said, the crowd reaction. And Nana says these gross things, like, he says, like, ROH officials won't let me be the lion that I am with my ladies. And he calls, Jay Chung a little girl as Mike Krul covers her up. And, calls the leash the royal leash. Like, it's just like, at the end he gets an asshole chant at the very least, one minor saving grace, but you described it. That says it all. Like, it was horrible. Can't wait for this whole thing to be over.
Yeah, we've talked about this kind of stuff so much. I'm sure we'll talk about it again in the future. So I guess let's just move on. We got other things to talk about on this show. The Ring of Honor Tag Team title match. BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs regained the Ring of Honor Tag Team titles when they defeated the Carnage Crew of Loc and DeVito in 9 minutes, 22 seconds when Whitmer pinned DeVito after a powerbomb Super Contra Code combo. The weird thing I thought at first was this started with Jimmy Jacobs and Whitmer jumping the Carnage Crew from behind when they were just posing in their entrance, which I felt like it's kind of a heel move. But yet when you watch how the matches worked, it's the Carnage Crew that's doing the heel stuff. Like, they're kind of yelling at the crowd. They're breaking up runs of offense with eye gouges. So I thought that was a little bit weird. It's not like, the Carnage Crew had really wronged them in any way other than just they beat them for the tag titles, but they didn't cheat to do it, I don't think. As for the match, so in a lot of ways, I felt like it was kind of similar to the first match in the sense where I felt like to Whitmer and Jacobs, they were wrestling just like a standard mid-undercard tag match. It wasn't that special, but I felt like there was a handful of spots from the Carnage Crew where you could tell they were really going all out because this was their big moment. So there's things they broke out that you either don't see from them or rarely see. So we get a superflex flying elbow drop combo where one does a superflex, one does a flying elbow drop. Loc does a goddamn senton bomb, the friggin' forward flip, which I thought was impressive, with he's back to having gained some weight. DeVito pulls out his big fat guy moonsault. DeVito does the thing where he backdrops an opponent into Loc, who grabs him midair, does the sit-out power bomb. There's also a nice callback from their title change match where the Carnage Crew set Jacobs up for another Doomsday Device type move, but this time instead of taking the Doomsday Device dropkick, or it looked like this time they're going for a Doomsday Device clothesline, Jimmy rolls it into a victory roll, and so DeVito completely misses the clothesline. So I thought that was a nice play off of the last match. And overall, I thought this was a very standard middle-of-the-road kind of undercard tag match. But those few spots, I think, were memorable and cool enough that I would put this just barely at 3 stars, which is probably higher than a lot of people would rate this. I saw some live reports saying, oh, this was a bad match. I think it was just an average mid-card tag match with a few neat spots, in my opinion. And finally, Matt, I would just say I think my biggest takeaway from this match, though, was CM Punk's commentary. You talked about in the first match. I felt in this match it bordered on outright just shitting on the guys in not a fun heel way. Punk had this problem sometimes where he was good on commentary at some points, and I feel like at some points he wasn't. When he was a heel, sometimes he would spend so much time talking about his own angles, which I realize That's why I think generally active wrestlers shouldn't be dedicated color commentary guys, because you have two masters to serve. You have to do – normally a commentator's job is just to put over the matches, but if you're also an active wrestler, you also have to play to your character and say the things your character would say. And, CM Punk at this point wouldn't be interested in calling a random undercard match. He wouldn't be interested in putting over Loke and DeVito. But if you listen to the commentary of this match, he just is merciless to these guys to the point where it's almost like – it almost feels too real to me. And for all I know, it's Punk just having a good time. But, man, he really shits on everyone in this match. And anyway, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, well, just to give people an example of what you're talking about, he makes fun of Jimmy Jacobs for wearing glitter lipstick, and Prazak's like, that's his choice. And Punk calls him a woman. Punk calls Jacobs a woman. And at one point, he says, let me see if I can actually find this line. Prazak talks about nursing an injury, and Punk says, speaking of nursing, do you think if you squeezed Loke's boobs, they'd give milk? That is what CM Punk says in this match. He also he says, if you stare at Whitmer and listen closely, you can hear the banjos playing in his head, and then he sings the Deliverance theme. That one was kind of funny.
No, that made me laugh. That was good.
I mean, listen, as bad as that nursing thing is, I did appreciate the transition of speaking of nursing. Like, I always appreciate a good transition. That's probably the best thing I could say about it. As far as the match, I agree with you that it was the best match of the show so far, as in better than the opener, but I definitely think it was worse than the first match between these two. If for no other reason than the crowd reactions alone. The crowd was pretty not into this, and they were pretty into the one at Escape from New York. I think that match also had a bit of a more propulsive energy. There was the brawling elements, and then they closed into the wrestling part of it, and then there was a table bump and all that stuff. It felt like it just had forward momentum, whereas this one was kind of slow. Yes, they do attack the Carnage Crew before the bell, but I think that's just a matter of tag team champions being angry that they lost the tag team titles, and that was how I took it. But as far as the match itself, yeah, it just felt slow. The second match in a row, and again, quiet crowd always makes a match feel a little bit less energetic. But they have a spot where Loke and Whitmer do wrestling on the mat, and let's just say it's not Bryan Danielson, but Loke does get a Saito suplex, and you mentioned some of the big spots with the moonsault and the rolling senton off the top. I noticed they won the match with the Contra Code Powerbomb combo instead of the Doomsday Rana. I guess maybe it was just that's a hard move to hit on certain guys. But I just felt like a not much doing match. Bland, I guess is what I would say. A bland match. But it held together all right. It wasn't terrible. I wouldn't give it 3 stars. Definitely not. But it wasn't bad. It just was bland and boring.
The Observer wrote, BJ Whitmer and Jimmy Jacobs regained the tag titles from the Carnage Crew in a bad brawl that ended when Jacobs pinned DeVito after a double-team powerbomb Shiranui off the top rope. The tag title change back and forth was done because Sapolsky felt some of the undercard booking had gotten predictable. Basically, he figured nobody thought the Carnage Crew could win the belts, so to shake things up, they did.
And I also want to add, at the last thing that Prazak says is, you can always say that the Carnage Crew did hold ROH Tag Team Gold. And to me, that felt like the real point. Carnage Crew was going to be leaving the company pretty soon, and it's you know what? Let them say they were the champs. And I really do feel like that was a big part of the motivation for this, even though that's not what Meltzer reported. I think that was a big part of it. It was like the gold watch.
Yeah. It's hey, you did, thank you for your service. Loke worked backstage, I think, helping out a lot, so, give them a little thank you quickly. And at this point, the tag titles were not very important, so you could afford to just kind of, you couldn't afford to do that with the world title, but with the tag titles, you can give someone this quick little thing. And
I think the Carnage Crew should have had a brief run with the world title at this point.
Loke with the pure title, DeVito with the world title.
Exactly.
Masada and Just Incredible with the tag titles.
Ooh. No, Danny Daniels and Masada.
Next up, we have the Rottweilers of Homicide, Low-Key, and Ricky Reyes, with Julius Smokes defeating James Gibson, Jay Lethal, and Samoa Joe in 23 minutes, 33 seconds when Homicide pinned Gibson after he hit him with a lariat with a chain wrapped around his arm that he was given to by Grim Reaper, who yet again will not be named by the Ring of Honor commentary. Matt, it kind of tells you something when, like, I think this match is a good symbol of how deep Ring of Honor's roster was, when you can have Low-Key, Homicide, Samoa Joe, and James Gibson in like a random, almost throwaway 6-man tag, fourth from the top of a show. Like, that's how stacked deep the roster was, where you could afford to just kind of bury these guys this deep in a match that wasn't going to be like a huge DVD or ticket mover. But what do you think about the actual match that happened? Some people I saw in live reports thought this was the best match of the entire show. What would you say?
Well, I mean, to be fair, one of the matches higher on the card than this. One of the participants was Fast Eddie. I'm just saying. But yeah, live, I actually also thought this was the best match on the show. It does not hold up to that level on video, at least not this many years later. But it did feel like that live, and I guess I can get into maybe why later on. But yeah, I thought it was a solid match, but I feel like it was probably too long and a bit disappointing, given what you just said about the participants. But solid. There were good stories being told. At the beginning, as the Rottweilers were standing in the ring waiting for the baby faces, I don't know, for some reason this stood out to me. Some kid in the audience just yelled out, "I'm a gangster, dude." I don't know why I found that so funny, but that you can, if you watch this match on DVD, you will hear the kid say that. Go back and watch it if you missed it, Trevor. But it starts out with, everybody's fighting all at once, no code of honor, and then Sinclair settles things down into a regular 6-man, much to my chagrin, because I have seen a Pier 6-man brawl in Philly a year later, and it turns out it's pretty good when they do that. But this match, they did not do that. They ended up just working a match and, doing things. So this was Ricky Reyes' first match back since another 6-man, because he was in the Trios tournament, and Romero has been back since then, but Reyes hasn't. And now Romero's gone and Reyes is back. And, he's doing all right, and this match has by far the best crowd noise of any match so far, but it's not like they're going crazy, even for what appears to be a first time ever matchup between Low-Key and James Gibson. I'm not sure if they wrestled anywhere, actually, besides this. And, they do some cool stuff. They do a knuckle lock where Low-Key bridges to avoid the pin, and then Gibson, gets on top of him, and he's still bridging. And, Low-Key chops Gibson, and it is very loud when he chops him. And Low-Key plays like he's scared of Jay Lethal, which is a nice touch, because, they are still building the angle where Low-Key wants to pin Lethal wants to pin Low-Key and hit the dragon suplex on him, and so Low-Key's acting scared, which, that's a good show of respect, because, I don't think it's easy to get Low-Key to agree to act scared of somebody, he does it for Samoa Joe to a point, but doing it for Jay Lethal, I think, is actually a cool thing for him to do. I don't know if you would agree with that, because I don't know that if that would be obvious that he would have done that at that time for somebody like Jay Lethal.
No, absolutely. Low-Key as a heel was willing to show more ass sometimes to some people, so to speak, sell a little bit bigger and be scared off a more, you wouldn't, I think some people that think heel Low-Key just think, oh, it's Low-Key just being, getting booed, but he does change his act a fair bit. Yeah,
definitely. Joe and Lethal do that thing where Lethal sits on the top rope and holds Reyes upside down in a tree of woe while Joe runs at him with the running boot. I really like that spot. That's a great tag team spot. And the babyfaces hold the advantage for a while. The pace is pretty slow, but it's pretty entertaining at this point. And then the Rottweilers take over. They cut James Gibson off, and they're doing pretty basic stuff, but it all looks pretty solid. Then they double team Lethal for a while and take back over on him. And even Smokes gets in some shots, and they choke him, and they do all this stuff. And at one point, Reyes and Low-Key do consecutive, like, dropping of Lethal's stomach first over the top rope. And then Low-Ki follows that with a big kick to Lethal's chest, which sends him to the outside. And then Smokes hits him with the bat. And, you know, they continue to work on Lethal with camel clutches, and they one person gets a camel clutch and they tag the other guy in, and he gets on a camel clutch. So they're working over Lethal's back, I guess. And, Big Gibson and Joe, like, they check on Lethal, and Joe almost snaps when Smokes calls him a fat ass, which is one of the entertaining spots in the match. And eventually, Lethal blocks a hot tag, hits a running suplex, gets the hot tag. Blocks a homicide suplex, hits his own running suplex, gets the hot tag to Joe, and Joe comes in and does a lot of his big spots. And then Gibson comes in and it becomes a Pier 6 brawl. It breaks down. Lethal does his big springboard back kick to Gibson when he has on a butterfly submission. Lethal hits a leg lariat and a gutbuster on Low-Ki, and then Lethal hits a big missile dropkick on Low-Ki and yells "Dragon!" But Danielson was not there. He meant his dragon suplex. But Homicide cuts that off, and they go for the double stop cop killer but Gibson breaks it up, and then Low-Ki ends up jumping on Homicide by mistake. And there was this one really awkward spot where the babyfaces try to whip all three Rottweilers, like Irish whip them all at once. But Reyes is out of the ring. He doesn't realize that, like, he's supposed to be in the ring for this Irish whip. So they kind of, like, stall while Joe goes to the outside and grabs Reyes, and then they get them all back in, and they do the spot where all three get Irish whipped. And the reason that they had to do that was because they followed it with, like, a trifecta simultaneous dive on all three Rottweilers. So, I mean, I guess they really couldn't avoid having to save that spot, but it was awkward while they were waiting for it. And then they do the Ole Ole on Homicide, and then Gibson is in the ring. He's trying to do the Tiger Driver, but Smokes distracts. Grim Reaper, like you said, gives Homicide the chain, and then Homicide hits the chain lariat on Gibson, gets the win. It was an okay heel finish, but there's going to be a lot of heel finishes on this show, and the match was long, and it definitely could have been more action, I think, than it was. I feel like if they cut 7 or 8 minutes off of this match and just made it faster paced, it could have been a great match. As it was just solid, but I don't think it was great.
Yeah, I would simultaneously call this the best match on the show so far, and also a fairly big disappointment. Like, simultaneously, both those things. I would say it's a good match, but with the talent involved, it should have been just a fucking banger, and it wasn't. You know, I put that like 3.25 stars. It's like you said. It wasn't a fast-paced match. I would say it's like a mid-tempo match where it's like always entertaining, but it's rarely thrilling. Like you don't get any real lows, but you don't really get many super big highs either. Yeah,
I would say it's never thrilling.
Yeah. I mean, I get okay. So I'll get to a thrill in a second, but I was going to ask you first. Do you think a match like this, like? One thing that's interesting about this era of Ring of Honor that I think that's different from the way indies kind of evolved afterwards was you would hear guys like Joe and Danielson talk about stuff like this I think there was, at least on some shows, an effort for some of the undercard guys to try to not overshadow the matches that would come later. And I feel like if you look at where the indies went, like PWG in like the more modern era of PWG, it became more about fewer matches, and basically every match has like no limitations. They're just going to go crazy, lengthy matches and try and steal the show. I feel like this is I watch this match and I go, if these guys really had their mindset to it, I really have a hard time believing they couldn't have done a better match than this. Not that this match was bad, but I just felt like this has to be them going, well, we're the fourth from the top, so let's not try and just do everything. But this is also one of those matches, Matt, where I feel really bad because I go, oh, this match, it's kind of disappointing. And then, like you, I noticed that spot where this was clearly a spot they had thought before the match because it's so involves everybody, where it's the triple Irish whip leading to the triple dive. And like you said, it's crazy because everyone else is in position and Ricky Reyes just wanders out of the ring and walks away. You can see Joe like try and grab him and be like, shit, I have to go get this guy now. And I thought, man, disappointing match. Ricky Reyes at it again. And I hate when this happens, Matt, when I feel this way. And then I read notes that tell me that the guy was hurt and that's why it was bad. Because I'll read the note right now. Dave wrote in The Observer, best match was said to be Low Key and Ricky Reyes and Homicide over Samoa Joe and Gibson and Jay Lethal when Grim Reaper gave Homicide a chain and he clotheslined Gibson with it for the pin. This was a brutal match as both Reyes and Lethal got legit concussions. Reyes' concussion was so bad he was taken to the hospital because he didn't remember anything about the match or even know what city he was in. Excellent heat, Dave adds. So I think it's clearly at that point, and I think, Matt, I did not know at the time, but looking back, knowing that, I think I know the spot Reyes got concussed on because there is if you talk about thrills, there is a Uranagi Joe gives Reyes. It's not his usual one from the corner where the guy's charging him in the corner. It's right in the middle of the ring, and watching it as the match happened, I thought, boy, that looks brutal. Rather than taking it on his back, basically, Reyes keeps rotating and takes it on his head. And I have to imagine that was probably where he got concussed. And
yeah, probably. Although, sometimes you find out like a concussion takes place on something that doesn't even look like anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're right. That makes the most sense.
So clearly I feel bad now for even having that thought in my head, like, Reyes, what are you doing? Because that must have been, if he couldn't remember what city he was in, he probably couldn't remember any spot they had pre-planned. And he probably just was wandering away because he's like, okay, I'm out of this part of the match. And Joe had to be like, shit, like, dude, remember, come back here.
So they say that Loki also got concussed, but he didn't have to go to the hospital?
Jay Lethal.
Oh, Jay Lethal got concussed, but he didn't have to go to the hospital.
No.
So that just shows how bad people were with concussions back then. Because you'd think if you have a concussion, you should go to the hospital, right?
Yeah, I mean, we were still in the era, which is sad, where I feel like a lot of guys, if the concussion, like, as long as you knew what city you were in, you were not going to be, or were knocked completely out. You were considered to be just walk it off, work the next show, don't even need to go to the doctor. But
yes, that does explain a lot about why the match could have been better, for sure.
Yeah. I feel like this was a match where there was like a lot of little threads, but nothing ever really is focused on enough to become like a major focus that really would distinguish this match. Like there is some cheating with the bat shot on the outside interference finish, but it's not a huge amount to really become the story of the match. Like Lethal does play face apparel for a little while, but it doesn't really become a major plus of the match or a long-term focus. Like you said, I think one of the highlights for me was getting to see Gibson and Low Key interact with each other. I would have really loved to have seen them have a full match because I think just they pair up really well in the sense that Low Key is great giving like really hard kicks and looking like he's kicking someone's ass and killing them, and Gibson's really great at selling, so I thought that would have been fun to see more of that. But again, we just get a taste of that here. Maybe my favorite moment of this match was, again, a commentary moment where after a dive, I think that hits Low Key or something, this Punk out of nowhere just randomly says, I think Low Key was crying. And for some reason that just made me laugh, like the idea that like Punk just Punk knows Low Key's image. The idea he's just saying, I think I saw Low Key cry. I just thought that was pretty funny. It was also neat. I mean, Low Key broke out like the tidal wave or whatever kick where he does the big springboard, like rotating kick off the ropes, which you haven't seen him do for a while.
Yeah, to break up the choke, right? Or the butterfly submission, right?
Yeah, I wrote in my notes overall, I said, this was not hidden gem level. This was more like hidden cubic zirconia level. Also, Matt, do you agree with Matt Dave, when he wrote from the live notes, excellent heat? I don't think this match had excellent heat. It was fine.
No, and in fact, looking back now, because like I said, live, it did feel like the best match. It really did, like for a few reasons. But like looking back, every match that was on the show after this had better heat than this one did.
And I will say, like, Dave's report wasn't the only report I saw doing research of the show where people, and like you said, live, you thought it was the best match too. I think a lot of people who were there live came away from thinking this was the best match. But I will give a brief spoiler. I do not think this was the best match on the show. I will not tip my hand on what I think is the best match yet, but I think there's a better match on the show, maybe even two.
Can I tip my hand?
Go ahead.
I think every match that follows this was better than this one.
You just had to top me, Matt. But you know what? I think there's a good case for that. We will explore our thoughts very quickly. But we go backstage at this point with Gary Michael Capetta. He's holding a new issue of Entertainment Weekly and plugs big coverage of Ring of Honor in it, showing us a quick glance at a half-page article, and he just says, with Husker Du and Bob Mould. And I actually paused. I tried to find a good close-up zoom of this, and I could read like half of it. And I think Bob Mould he used to work, obviously people might know him from his seminal punk band Husker Du, his great solo career. I like Silver Age, great album by Bob Mould.
And Sugar.
Yeah, great band there too. He was a wrestling fan. He used to work for WCW for a brief time. He was even on like Wrestling Observer Live back in the day talking about it. I think he briefly had an article in Entertainment Weekly, maybe even just talking about wrestling. And it's funny, like I couldn't make out much of the article when I like freeze framed it, Matt. But what it was, he was talking about the Carnage Crew. Like, that was mostly what he's talking about, like, oh, you know, the Carnage Crew, like, they have a shirt that says fat, dumb, and ugly, and blah, blah, blah. And I just thought to myself, like, could you imagine being Ring of Honor and you're like, we got a half-page article in Entertainment Weekly, and most of the article is about the Carnage Crew.
Although I do want to say this. That is not what their shirt says. Fat, dumb, and ugly? It's fat, drunk, and pissed off. Jeez.
I'm sorry. Look, CM Punk's commentary's gotten to me. Matt, I have the right to pretend the shirt said that, okay?
All right, you know what? You trump me. That's right, you do. You have the right to pretend. Okay. I cannot argue with that. You evoked the 82nd Amendment.
Matt, I want my apology to you. Loke DeVito, I'm sorry to you. I thought your shirt said that. I do not think that. I thought your shirt said that. Please do not be angry at me, please.
He evoked the right to pretend. You cannot say anything to him now. That's the law.
Anyway, right now, Gary then reveals he's not here to promote Entertainment Weekly and Ring of Honor's article in the magazine. He's there to be joined by Lacey's Angels. Lacey is there and with DeRanged and I believe Cheech and LaRanged. Jeez, Matt, I am going off the rails here.
You're so scared that the Carnage Crew is going to come and get you.
That would be, by the way, that would be an excellent portmanteau if Lacey and DeRanged ever dated, though. LaRanged. That would be great.
That's true.
It's my favorite ZZ Top song, Matt. LaRanged. Lacey berates DeRanged for losing again. She says she's going to have to put him on suspension for that. Gary says he's going to read his Entertainment Weekly, and they need to figure this out. So Gary really entered into his Entertainment Weekly.
And this is going to build to two personnel changes in Lacey's Angels that will have implications in angles for years to come.
The bottom third of the card really getting an overhaul in the coming shows. You know, between El Generico and Kevin Steen basically getting the kibosh on their little tryout run, and Lacey's Angels changing, and Ring Crew Express being phased down to kind of showing up only semi occasionally. Carnage Crew almost done. Like, a lot of stuff is changing, and
they're all being replaced just by Claudio Castagnoli. It's just him. He replaces like all 7 of those guys.
He's almost as much of a talent. I mean, it's hard to quantify talent. Would you say the talent of those 7 combined make up one Claudio? I mean, he is very talented, but he is also tall. But
tall and talented. Talented. He's talented. Just talented with 2 L's.
LaRanged. Next up, Alex Shelley comes out. He steps in the ring and grabs the mic as the crowd chants his name. So again, this is our last chance to really savor the Alex Shelley babyface run that could have been, because this is like yet another show where he gets a really nice babyface reaction. Shelley says for months now he's been going around and making apologies, but it's gotten him absolutely nothing. But he then catches himself. Well, he says, it got me delirious as a tag partner for a match, a guy who thinks he's a lizard. At this point, some of the crowd must have said like he is a lizard, because he then like very earnestly he says like, no, he's not a lizard. Like he says to someone in the crowd. Shelley says that he can live with his decisions, though, and points out this is the wrestling business where the goal is monetary gain to earn as much money as possible. Shelley says with that in mind, he didn't sell out, people. he bought in. At this point, the embassy's theme kicks in. Shelley does this little pose where he kind of makes like a little pyramid of his hands above his head. And we hear a couple fans groan as they realize what this means. The entire embassy of Prince Nana, Jade Chung, Fast Eddie, Mike Cruel, and Jimmy Rave all come out. Nana hugs Shelley. The crowd boos. Rave's wearing jeans and a red t-shirt. His fists are taped, so he's already ready for his street fight that comes later in the show. At this point, Rave grabs the mic and he tells Shelley that he forgave Shelley for what he did in the past and says that Shelley taught him that nice guys finish last. He welcomes Shelley to the embassy. Nana tells Rave to go back to the limo and enjoy the air conditioning for his match later tonight. I like the idea that, like, you know, in the guard armory, the only way you're going to get air conditioning is if you have a limo in the parking lot. And
the lap of luxury, just sit in the car.
And that brings us to the match, which is – but I guess before we go to the match, Matt, I guess we should just talk about the turn, which is, you know, they had built this match of that – you know, that Alex Shelley had a surprise mystery partner for the show. And obviously the mystery partner turns out to be Fast Eddie, which would probably be disappointing if it's not paired with the heel turn.
I was going to make that joke myself. Just like, so he joins the embassy, which is the big angle. But of course it buries the lead that the mystery partner is Fast Eddie, which I know it sounds like I'm making fun of Fast Eddie, but I think he would even agree he was not a big star in ROH. They never let him get to that level. So that is a less impressive mystery partner than Delirious in terms of star power. But yes, it was paired with this big angle, which is Alex Shelley is a heel. He is in the embassy. I think my reaction when I saw it live was sort of like, this doesn't feel that great to me. Like, you know, but I think it turned out okay. But I think that I was pretty into the idea of Shelley as a babyface. And I think I was disappointed that he wouldn't be anymore. I think that was my initial reaction.
Yeah, me too. And I also feel like it's kind of weird because I feel like there is a great potential angle in saying, on paper, there's an idea of Alex Shelley gets rejected by his own heel stable. He spends literally half a year trying to get like people to forgive him, trying to get anyone to kind of be on his side fighting these guys. And finally he just gives up and says, fuck it. You know, all these, I tried, no one would stand on my side. And you know what? You've left me no choice. I'm going to join with these heels because you know what? They'll have me, you know, but instead, if you listen to the commentary for the match that follows, they're very into, you know, he's just treat him as a heel, like no, which I mean, he is, the point is to make him a heel, obviously. So that's what they have to do. But I found it was kind of weird because like, I had sympathy for him because it was kind of like, you know, commentary keeps acting like, I can't believe, you know, Alex Shelley sold out. He sold out for the money at Prince Nana. But like the way this storyline had been played out, it was like he had no choice. Like literally on this show, his promo was him having to change in the stairwell because the wrestlers 6 months later still won't let him, like, even in the locker room. So what was he supposed to do? Like, how many shows have we seen where he gets like the crap beat out of him by Generation Next and no one helps him? Like, was he supposed to just keep being completely alone and reject the only people in the company that would help him? Like, and I felt so in that sense, it kind of worked against what they were trying to do, like the booking.
I will say this. I think one thing they could have done a little better besides what you said is they could have put some emphasis on this angle on the recent shows right before this. Like, you know, since it's been so long, he was gone for a month, you know, they kind of took focus off of that whole Alex Shelley wants forgiveness storyline. Really, since Nowhere to Run, they haven't talked much about it. And then he comes back and he just runs out of the crowd. And so they should have done some sort of angle to make people, to remind people, like, he's trying, but he's rejected. And then, like, it's sort of, so this promo makes a little bit more contextual sense. But you're right, like, the overall story that they told is pretty good, honestly. Like the idea that he's not accepted, so he goes to the people that will accept him, who are bad guys. But they just didn't quite tell the story with the sense of, like, relevance to this moment that they could have. But, you know, it's hard to time things perfectly, right? But I think the angle is good. But you're right. What they should have done is played up the story better on commentary.
I guess the problem is that story makes him sympathetic, and you don't want him. Ring of Honor's booking, they don't want him to be sympathetic. They want Generation X to be the faces now, and him to be the heel. If you play out that story it makes him in a way almost look out to be the good guy. So instead they go really into he's just a sellout, the generic, he's a sellout, he sold out for the money, he's all about the cash kind of stuff, which again, it just feels different, not of a piece with the way he had been booked prior to this.
Well, they could have made that work too, because and even as a heel, because they could have said like, oh, this guy's a snake in the grass, people were right not to trust him because he was always ready to sell out at the drop of a hat. And like they didn't go really that direction either, You
know what would have worked in that vein? Not that we're basically doing fantasy booking now, but if they had done like you were saying, they needed to re-emphasize this angle before this happened. If they had just even had one show where someone from the back, like a beloved babyface, finally trusted him, let's say this was like on a show like this where the turn happened, it was him teaming with AJ Styles against two people, and then he turns on them because the embassy wants him to, or whatever, because Jimmy Rave and that would make sense because Jimmy Rave is feuding with AJ Styles. That would really bring it all together, because then you could say, yes, you could feel sympathy because everyone was betraying him, but then he shows, like you said, his true colors, because the second someone trusts him, then he sells out, because it just shows you that he was always that kind of asshole.
Yeah.
He didn't deserve redemption.
That would have been good. Yeah.
But instead, no one ever forgives him, so you just kind of feel sorry for him. But
right.
That brings us to the match of the Embassy of Alex Shelley and Fast Eddie defeated Generation Next of Austin Aries and Roderick Strong in 12 minutes, 52 seconds, when Shelley pinned Aries after Jimmy Rave hit him with a couple chair shots and a chair-assisted running knee. I thought this was a fun match. There is a frantic, not quite frantic pace or breakneck pace, but a pretty fairly fast, urgent pace to the opening and closing portions of this match. And to me, this match is fun just because it is fun to see Roderick Strong and Austin Aries run around and hit big moves and do their offense to people. And I thought they did that really well here. I thought both those guys looked really good here. This is a match where early on, they're in the opening minutes, they're just doing the heart attack clothesline. That's where the joys of this match come from, stuff like that, where it's just oh, this is cool. The first few minutes, in fact, of the match are them just dominating Fast Eddie, and it's really fun just to see them get the run of the match to hit their offense. The middle of the match sees them slow it down a bit so Aries can play face in peril, which I thought was interesting because it kind of shows you where these two were at in their careers at this moment in Ring of Honor, where it was actually, Aries, the former world champion, is the one that's taking the beating to give Roderick Strong the chance to shine with the hot tag rather than you'd normally expect, maybe the other way around. But it kind of shows you where Ring of Honor's focus, I think, was at this point. Fast Eddie, I thought, looked solid at points. He really lays into Roddy with chops of his own. He does his usual offense, which involves a lot of moves that drop guys over the back of over his knee. But I also felt like Fast Eddie also, he's a guy where he constantly, in a lot of his matches, he just, his timing and positioning is just a little bit off. A lot of times it doesn't result in outright botches, but there are just things where moves don't hit perfectly, or guys have to wait an extra second for him to be in the right spot. There's a funny moment in this match where Aries is getting beat down. He's in the heel corner and he's trying to fight both Eddie and Rave off at once, and Eddie's standing on the apron at points, and Aries keeps trying to throw these blind back elbows to Fast Eddie, and at times Eddie's not on the apron or he's not in the right position, and Aries keeps throwing them and he's never in the right position, and it was just kind of, to me, that kind of summed up whether, I don't even know if that was Eddie's fault, but it kind of to me summed up Fast Eddie's Ring of Honor run, where he's just never quite where you want him to be, it feels like. I mean,
and I know this is a running joke, but he is legally blind, and
exactly,
I mean that seriously, It probably does affect some of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I felt like Shelley, he was more of the glue guy in this match. He's the guy who slows it down in the middle section. He's the one guy here I felt that was really playing a character where he's kind of talking shit and being kind of the smarmy dick, really selling, the heel role he's just taken back. But overall, I thought this was a good tag match. I don't know if I would put this as better than the 6-man. You know what? I would say, it is, because it was more fun, I would say. It's shorter, it's more fun. I would say it's a little bit better than the 6-man. an enjoyable tag. Nothing special, but it's the kind of match in the middle of a card. You're perfectly happy to get a match of this quality, I would say.
Yeah, I'm pretty much 100% agreement with you about this match. Every aspect of it. And even with Shelley, I really did like him as a face, but he does seem invigorated here, working that character, working on Aries' neck and taunting him. He feels like he has more purpose now, which I appreciated. Now, live, I didn't like the match as much because I think I was just so newly entranced by ROH that I was just really sucked in by the idea of clean finishes. And this was the second heel cheating finish of the show in a row, and yeah. I was just that really disrupted any enjoyment I would have had from the match. And that'll be a trend I think for the rest of the show. But now that doesn't bother me at all. Given the big picture, and I just enjoyed how good Aries and especially Strong's offense looked. I really did think Eddie looked pretty good, when he was doing offense at the very least. I was impressed by the fact that he kind of held his own with Roderick when it came to chops. I would not have expected that. And yeah, it just had a lot of cool athletic moves and a good story to it and a good pace. And the heel finish didn't bother me at all at this point. It actually, I think, enhanced the match. So I think this was quite a good match.
And I do want to say, as much as we talked about how maybe we would have liked to have seen a better face run for Shelley, and maybe this angle we just set out ways it could have been done better. I will say, from the aspect of the Embassy, if you're just looking at the aspect of Embassy and not Alex Shelley, putting Alex Shelley in there was a great move. It finally, it's really part of the transition. We're going to see Abyss coming very soon to Ring of Honor and joining the Embassy. Basically, this is the start of the Embassy going from kind of a joke heel group where it's basically a giant entourage for Jimmy Rave, who's the only one that's really taken seriously, to more of a serious heel stable where there's multiple guys in there that are really good wrestlers that you can take seriously, that will be booked seriously. And in that sense, it's a huge boon for the Embassy. And I know Jimmy Rave really liked working with Alex Shelley, and I think he said Alex Shelley really had a lot of fun working with the Embassy. So instead of just having fun, I'm sure these guys probably were loved that they got to work together like this.
Yeah, and by the end of this match, you see all the Embassy posing, and it's Shelley and Rave and Jade Chung and Nana and Fast Eddie and Mike Cruel, and it's this gang. But then Cruel and Eddie are gone in a jiff. I don't know how soon they're gone, but pretty soon. And by the time they get to the Generation Next versus Embassy matches, it's instead of Cruel and Eddie in there, it's Abyss and Nana himself who are in those matches. So they definitely Shelley's entry definitely made them feel like they had license to get rid of some of the pure preliminary guys in the stable and just make it much more of a top star stable.
So after the match, the rest of the Embassy put the boots to Aries until AJ Styles, who's also in street clothes, jeans and a t-shirt, runs to the ring, fist tapes up. He fights them off. Rave bails to the floor. AJ demands that their match start right now. And we get the Philadelphia Street Fight. Jimmy Rave defeated AJ Styles via pinfall in 12 minutes, 51 seconds after he hit a Styles Clash. But before that, what set up the Styles Clash was Alex Shelley running in for interference, hitting AJ Styles with the Shell Shock. Matt, this was the semi-main event and our third straight match in a row where heel interference from the outside interference led to the finish, which you talked about live. You didn't like that interference. I will say I got some quotes from live reports and other stuff. That was the big talk. There were some people that were very mad that Ring of Honor went this heel outside interference heavy on this show. But, what'd you think about – there's way more to talk about this than just the interference. What'd you think about this match?
Well, I definitely was on that page of being really mad about all the outside interference and stuff when I watched it live. And, when you first see something like this, you don't know if it's does their booking suck now? And then once you keep watching and you realize that this wasn't going to be a trend and it was all to serve a bigger purpose, it becomes a lot less annoying. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But at the time it was just what the fuck? You're not supposed to be doing this. But as far as the match, I thought the match was pretty good. There were some downsides. Don't get me wrong. The downsides were, first of all, AJ Styles' punches. AJ Styles has a lot of really good offense. In 2005, his punches were not among his good offense. Like, he had pretty, I couldn't believe how bad his punches were, actually. Rave's punches looked much, much, much better than AJ's. And AJ got better when it came to that. But it was just surprising because he did everything so well. And, like, he did not punch well. If you go back and look, that was strange to me. The other negative were there was a lot of brawling in the crowd. And I don't think they did a good job of lighting the crowd brawl. Like, there were some spots where, like, both guys, like there was a spot where they were fighting in the crowd and Styles, and they were both standing on chairs, and Styles was trying to suplex Rave onto a row of chairs, but Rave blocked and DDT'd Styles. And the only reason I know it was a DDT was because Prazak said it, because like between the darkness and the glare, I could not tell what the move was. Like, it looked almost like a monkey flip or like some other weird thing, but they said it was a DDT. So like, as I guess when the camera dropped down for the move, like you could see the glare of like the stage light. Like, it was weird. But and there was a lot of issues with darkness when they were fighting in the crowd. But that said, this match started with good intensity. AJ attacked from the beginning, violently drove Rave into the guardrail repeatedly, which looked very brutal. And then he just picked up Rave and pressed him into the crowd. And they fought by the merchandise stand. They fought onto the merchandise stand. They eventually got back to the ring. And there was a spot where AJ, like, he slipped and Rave hit a knee strike for the first 2 count of the match. And, like, the way they did the slip, it almost looked like a real slip. But then Rave recovered so fast and did such a good recovery that I almost think it was intentional. And then at one point, AJ headbutted Rave like a bajillion times. That took me out of the match a little bit, I will say, because it's just like he headbutted him a lot, and he barely sold it, and he didn't like. It's like, I don't know. That's too many headbutts to be plausible. That said,
I was going to ask you, did you think that was I saw some people, like, I couldn't decide if that was corny or not. Like, for those who haven't seen the match, AJ grabs Rave and basically they like walk around the ring and he gives like 30 little mini headbutts. And part of me thought it was kind of cool and part of me thought it looked kind of dumb. And I saw some people in reviews online, they thought it looked great. Some people thought, oh, this looks really corny. And it's the move that Rave blades on. So
yeah,
did you, just on how it looked, did you think it looked good or did you think this looks kind of dumb?
I thought it looked kind of dumb, but I was okay with like that, like at least Rave bled on that, but I almost think like AJ should have 2. Like, if you're going to headbutt a guy that many times, right? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous anyway. Like, it's impossible. It's impossible to headbutt a guy that many times, but like, if you're doing real headbutts. But like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a match. Like, it wasn't the most egregious thing I've seen, and then at one point they're fighting on the apron, and AJ goes for a Russian leg sweep through the timekeeper's table, but Rave blocks it. So AJ just belly to back suplexes him through it, and he gets a dangerous call by Gabe. And I thought it was a very good looking suplex. Like, they really went flush through that table. I thought that was a pretty cool spot, honestly. Not too contrived. And then back in the ring, AJ set up a chair, goes for the Styles Clash. Rave fought out, backdropped AJ on the chair, and then hits a pretty brutal curb stomp onto AJ into the chair. And I know you tweeted this and said, take that, Super Dragon. This wasn't a Super Dragon style curb stomp, though. This was a Seth Rollins style curb stomp.
Yeah.
And it was very brutal. And like just if you're talking about like an intense brawling move, like that's one. But AJ doesn't sell for very long. He comes back. He hits a brainbuster onto Rave, onto an open chair. And that's when we get our third straight heel finish. Cruel and Eddie take AJ out with punches. So AJ dives onto them and Nana. And then Chung gets in the ring. He tries to slap AJ. So AJ takes her hand, then spanks her on the butt, kind of, and sends her out of the rings. And as he's tapping her on the ass, gratuitously, the announcers compliment his compassion and class and call him a real man. And I'm like, so that kind of says it all about 2005 ROH, that this was the example of a classy guy.
And AJ was the same guy a few shows ago when Jade Chung stepped in the ring. He was like daring her to do something, like threatening to hit her if she tried something. Like
what did he say? Like, oh, something your cap or something like that. Oh, remember that?
Yeah, he was going to peel her cap or something like.
That's what it was.
A real class act, you know.
Yeah,
a gentleman's gentleman.
Yeah, so I wasn't crazy about that. But then at that point, AJ went for the Styles Clash. Shelly ran in, shell shocked him. Rave hit the Rave Clash, got the win. Big bullshit chant for that one for the heel for the second or actually the third heel finish in a row. But the match was entertaining. Like, yeah, I can not say that it wasn't. Like, and the crowd was it was definitely the hottest the crowd was the whole night. And I thought it was pretty good. But yeah, it definitely had its flaws, which I tried to point out. And I still think overall it was a good match, a good brawl.
Yeah, this was my favorite match of the show thus far. I would probably put it as like 3.5 stars. So not like it's not a great match, but I enjoyed this match. I feel it's almost like two matches where you get the first half, which is the brawl you talked about. It gets all the way to the concession area, and like you said, the problem. Like I thought the brawling was intense, fairly intense, and I didn't even work. I wasn't as bothered even by AJ's punches as you, and I thought overall I enjoyed the brawl, but like you said, has the common brawl problem that most indies have, which is the cameras and the lighting don't really keep track of the action, so it's hard to see a lot of what's happening. And then the second half of the match goes back in the ring, and it is what you described, which it is mostly just built around a handful of really cool spots and them kind of just selling in between the spots, which they should be because it's a brutal spots. You should be selling, but you know, again, the backs, like you said, the suplex off the apron through the table, the brainbuster on the open chair, the brutal running knee, Rave bleeding, you know, AJ doing the big dive near the end to take out the embassy. And it's just like big, dumb fun. Like, I really enjoyed all of that. I thought it was, you know, it accomplished what it should have on that point. And there was enough hate in the opening part, you know, to feel like it was part of a feud. It's weird. So when I came to the end of this match, I was like, but I still only think it's like a 3.5 star match. And a lot of times when I come to the end of a match and I give it that level of a rating, I can tell you exactly the flaws that kept it from being me giving it a higher rating. This match, I was just like, I don't know what I can't really come out with a big criticism of this match other than maybe, you know, the lighting and the headbutt spot looking a little dorky and stuff like that. But it's not like I have a huge criticism of this match. It's just, I don't feel much like I don't feel like going higher in this match, but at the same time, I'm not like, oh, there's this huge gaping flaw. It's just like, it's a good match.
Well, if I can kind of take that assessment and kind of defend it a little bit, I don't look at matches like they start at 5 stars and then you like check off flaws to work your way down. Like a match has to just reach a level to reach that level. And so if it didn't reach that level, it didn't reach that level. You know what I mean? Like I don't think it needs flaws to not be a super great match. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And see, sometimes I do think I do look at it that other way, you know, and maybe that's not the right way. Like, you know, maybe I shouldn't be watching like a 1994 WWF Superstars Bastion Booger Marty Jannetty match and going, this starts at 5 stars and every minute they do something, I'm going to be seeing if I'm taking away anything. But I'm like,
seems exhausting.
That's one demerit for these guys. And Matt, finally, the most important question about this match. Was toilet paper thrown in the ring after the match? I think it was just unrolled streamers, but I am now constantly on the lookout. You are the referee.
Yeah, trust me. I look because I know we're going to have these conversations. There was not toilet paper thrown in the ring.
Okay. So after the match, Embassy puts the boots to AJ as fans throw streamers in the ring and chant bullshit. Roderick Strong runs in to try and make the save, but he gets overwhelmed very quickly by the entire Embassy. The crowd chants for Austin Aries, who eventually runs in, selling his back. He gets taken out too. A few fans at this point briefly chant for Samoa Joe for some reason. I feel like just fans were getting in the habit of just chanting for Samoa Joe anytime someone needed to run in. They just wanted to see Samoa Joe.
Can you blame them?
Yeah, no, definitely not. The Embassy poses, they leave. Rave does AJ Styles' arms outstretched pose. The Embassy does their little diamond hand gesture yet again, which leads to a really funny moment where Nana sees that like Eddie's just flexing and he's not doing the hand gesture, and in what seems to be like a legit like real moment, I think he screams at him in a way that felt real. He goes, "Put it up, the diamond," he says, and then Eddie does the hand gesture, and we're like, Nana's like, dude, come on. It's a funny little moment. The embassy leaves as AJ and Aries and Roderick recover in the ring. They kind of stare for a second and then they shake hands. So we see a new alliance is being formed between Gen Next and AJ Styles.
I guess this is the real cementing of their face turn, I guess. Like, I know I've been waiting for it, but this has got to be it.
I mean, they're aligning with a top babyface. A heel group has just done very dastardly deeds against them. Like, this really does have to – I know we've said they're faced now like 4 times this year, but this really does have to be the point of no return. Like, they cannot act like heels after this.
Yeah, and I did like the beatdown at the end. Like, I thought the embassy seemed like a swarm of bees in like a good way, you know?
Yeah. Just the fact that, one guy would come out, then another guy would come out, and they just couldn't, it just kind of reinforced just how overwhelming, how many of them there were. But that brings us to the main event of the evening, the Ring of Honor World Title match, a match in some ways that was a year and a half in the making. CM Punk versus Christopher Daniels went to a 60-minute time limit draw. So this would be what let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4. This would be, I think, the 5th match in Ring of Honor history to go 60 minutes or more, because you got the 60-minute Iron Man match at Crowning a Champions. You got the 2 Samoa Joe CM Punk draws. You've got the 70-plus minute Aries Danielson match, and this would be the 5th. This is the one that is – those other matches, all well remembered. This match, not – I wouldn't even say not well remembered, just not remembered, I think. A lot of people don't even remember that these two had a 60-minute match.
Yes, I remember it because it was the very first 60-minute time limit draw I got to see live for a world title match, so I will never forget it.
So this match, I would say – I mean, it's not well remembered, but of those who do remember it, most people are disappointed, but I would say – there's a fair mix of thoughts. I've seen people doing some research of the show, giving ratings as low as 2.5 stars to this. I've seen people go as high as 4 stars on this. My thoughts on this match, it's kind of complicated, where I would say I think there are elements of this match that are almost like a master class of how to pace a 60-minute match. And I think there are elements of this match that show you all the flaws that you can do in a 60-minute match. So I guess I would start off with the good stuff. The part I think is a masterclass is, apart from the opening 10 minutes where CM Punk does a lot of stalling and they do a pretty slow start, which you might expect in a lot of matches, and is more acceptable in the opening 10 minutes, I think these guys do a fantastic job at pacing the rest of this match, because a lot of matches, they're like, 3 or 4 big peaks and valleys. I think if you looked at this match on like a sign, like a wave graph or something, it would be like 30 small peaks and valleys where like these guys do a great job after the opening minutes of every minute or two. They do like a sequence or a spot that's just exciting enough to keep the fans engaged, and then they sell or they slow it back down again. And they do that so often. I feel like for a 60-minute match, the crowd might not ever be at some point. There might be times where they're more down than other times, but I never feel like they lose the crowd at any point in this match. And in any 60-minute match, I feel like that's a victory in itself. I feel like they did a really good job of kind of just breadcrumbing the action throughout to keep them into it without ever like blowing huge spots too early or anything like that. And the work, it's good CM Punk, Christopher Daniels professional wrestling. In some ways, it feels different than the match they might normally have because it's longer and they have to pace it a bit different. But in some ways, it just feels like a longer version of the match they might have had otherwise in some ways, because it's a textbook Christopher Daniels match where you've seen a lot of Christopher Daniels matches like this where each guy picks a body part and works on the other guy, including, midsection body part work on Christopher Daniels, which I believe it seems like it happens in a lot of Christopher Daniels matches. And it's very competent, good, solid professional wrestling. Now, the bad parts I would say is this is a match where I feel like one of the big flaws in 60-minute matches, obviously, is it's easy to tip off. It's hard to hide that's going to be a 60-minute match, because you have to wrestle in a different way for cardio sake, for just pacing sake, you have to fill up the match in a different way. And this is a match where sometimes I've seen 60-minute matches, they try and start with a hot opening before they slow it down to try and make the crowd think that maybe it's not going to be long. This is a match where right from the very start, I think you can tell it's going to be a long match, because the opening minutes are pretty slow. Punk in the opening minutes, he's taking any opportunity to go to the floor, whether he wins an exchange or loses an exchange. He just bails to the crowd floor each time it interacts with the crowd, like the maroon Larry Zbyszko that he is. He you know, and even like in the middle of the match, I think as wrestling fans, we kind of get trained over time to know like the rhythms of matches, where we know where usually matches, they reach a certain point where they like they've hit a new gear and we know they're not going to slow down again. And this is a match where, again, it keeps slowing down. Like, this is a match where at the 30-minute mark, around that point, at a point that's a length of time where most Ring of Honor matches do not even last that long. They are trading abdominal stretches. So like at that point, you know, if we're 30 minutes in and they're still at a point where they're just trading abdominal stretches, this match is going long. And, you know, it does, for some people, that's going to take them out of it in some ways. Some people just will not be able to accept the 60-minute match. I would be lying if I said that my attention never wavered during this match. There were a few times, but I will say for the most part, it did a pretty good job of holding my attention. There were a few little moments where I was kind of like starting to waver a bit. There were a lot of great moments, which I can get into after, but I feel like I'm already going too long talking about, but of like where Christopher Daniels matches often have this, where like the dueling body part work plays into each other. Like Punk will ram Daniels' injured stomach with his head and shoulder, but that hurts the neck that Daniels has been working over. So like they hurt each other with spots like that. There's a few spots like that which are really nice. Or like Daniels is in a body scissors that's working over his injured midsection, so he breaks the hold by chopping Punk in his neck, which he's been working on. Stuff like that I always enjoy. I guess the controversial part of this match is, other than it being a draw, is the 45-minute mark where there is a ref bump where Punk goes for a flying drop kick. Daniels gets out of the way. It hits the ref. At this point, there are a couple visual pins where Daniels is able to hit the Blue Thunder driver, and he gets a 3 count, but no one's there to count it. And then Punk hits the Pepsi Twist clothesline, and no one is there to count it. And then finally, Daniels hits the best moonsault ever. A second ref, Mike Keener, is the one who gets bumped. Todd Sinclair runs from the back, and he goes and makes the count, the near fall count. And Punk kicks out at 2, but of course he's had extra time to rest because Sinclair had to run from the back. Now, a lot of people hated this. In fact, I'll just go straight to the Observer quote on this. Let me just find it here. Dave wrote, "This match got a mixed reaction. It's pretty well conceded that the work was very strong, but lots of complaints, including the fact that almost everyone figured out early they were going long, and that people absolutely hated the draw, and mostly left mad after all heel wins. Mostly not that big a deal in Ring of Honor." Anyway, he says the crowd was, let me just go, I'm just going to skip forward because there's a part I'm saving for later. Crowd also hated the ref bump after Punk hit a missile dropkick and then no ref spot where Daniels had Punk pinned for 10 seconds. Daniels hit the moonsault and a second ref ran in and Punk kicked out, exactly like every single WWE TV and pay-per-view main event. That was at the 45-minute mark and a spot put in by Punk because he wanted people to think it wasn't going 60 minutes. There was a big pop for that kick-out spot, just like there is in every WWE main event. Daniels hit the angel swings at the bell. We heard 3.5 stars to 4 stars on this match. Very negative reaction to the finish. Now, I am not bugged by the ref bump spot. I understand some fans being like, oh, that's WWE type shit, but Ring of Honor rarely did that shit, and I can completely see why Punk put that in there, because like I said, I think it was very obvious this match was going long, and I think the point of doing it is almost you're playing off the WWE's usage of it, because usually if you watch WWE matches, when the ref bump comes, the finish is coming within the next few minutes, and I think Punk probably did that, like Dave said in The Observer, 15 minutes before the end of the draw, probably to try and maybe get the fans to think, if we're seeing a ref bump now, the finish is probably coming. I don't know I think the fans, it got a fairly nice pop, but not a crazy pop for that kick out on the Daniels thing. I don't know if it completely fooled the fans the rest of the way. But I do think it was a smart idea and was a nice near fall, and it didn't bug me. The one thing, Matt, before I hand it to you, that I will say that spot did bug me, is it's a pet peeve I have where you do a ref bump, and then the visual near falls come on moves that would never get pins otherwise. Like Punk is down for like 10 seconds or whatever Dave said for a Blue Thunder driver. Daniels never wins a match with that. And then right afterwards, where Punk makes his comeback, he hits the Pepsi twist clothesline, another move I've never seen a win a match, and Daniels is down for the 3 count. And that's the part I hate. Not the ref run and not the ref bump. I hate the fact that both these guys had like visual pinfall losses to moves that would never win matches otherwise. But other than that, I would say my opinion on this match, it's like a 3.5 star match. It's weird because there's some really good work in this match, but part of me was almost wanting to go 3 3/4 stars. But then part of me sat down, I thought about it, and I thought, like, unlike a lot of those other 60-minute matches we've covered, you always have to be in the mood to watch a 60-minute match. This is a match where it's like, I had fun. I was never really bored. I think they did an admirable job filling the time. But if someone asked me, do you want to watch this match again? I would say no. And I can't go too high on a match where I would say I don't really have a desire to ever see this match again. But yet I would still say it's good. So it's such a weird place I'm in. But Matt, what did you think about this match?
So I mean, I really actually do feel very similar to you, like in terms of the big picture and everything. I will say that live, I definitely was on the page of the people that didn't like the finish, didn't like the ref bump, was pretty disappointed. I think that the slow pace, I think, was just too much also, and the crowd got into some big spots in the ending, but they weren't like super hot for most of the match. You know what I mean? Like they were watching. They weren't like shitting on it or anything. But it's not like Joe versus Punk where they had the crowd in the palm of their hands the whole time. And
they would pop when something neat happened, and then they would be quiet when something didn't happen.
Right. And I think that another thing that this match had that was obviously it's unfortunate, but it's a CM Punk 60-minute match. You're going to compare it to the Joe matches, right? And especially Joe versus Punk, too. And, like, that match took you on a ride the entire time. This was a lot more of a traditional pace. Like, they're going to go slow. They're going to repeat stuff. And I do think there was too much repetitiveness in this match. Like, some of the trading punches, spots, and some of the holds they would go back to. It's interesting. Early in the match, well, actually, first I want to start with something funny. The first thing I noticed at the very, very beginning when Punk is actually making his entrance. So he comes out right through the curtain, and a kid like grabs his arm, and he turns and like he's like, "What the fuck?" and like something like that. Like he swears at them, and I don't know if I'm just projecting, but I thought I saw in Punk's face like him realizing like, "Oh shit, I just cursed at a little kid," and like he sort of like keeps his angry face, but also kind of gets quiet, and like almost like he's embarrassed that he yelled at a kid, which I thought was pretty funny. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and that is not how he felt at all.
No, but I noticed that too. It's like he caught himself. Like it's almost like, the Punk that's willing to, as we've covered on multiple recent shows, that's willing to like attack or chase fans, like was coming out, and then he was like, oh shit, underage, not 18, can't do this.
Yeah. And then in a very 2005, ROH's classy 2005 strikes again moment, the first chant of the match is the crowd going, "She's a slut." And I think it was directed at a fan that Punk was insulting. So they were, siding with the heel in order to insult a female fan in the crowd. Stay classy 2005 ROH. But yeah, like you said, very, very blatant stalling at the beginning. Like, super blatant. In the meantime, Gabe is commenting like, "This is weird. You'd think they would go out and have a real brawl given how much they hate each other." And I actually was wondering if like Gabe himself was on the side of this 60-minute draw idea or if he had to be sold on it. And
Gabe seemed almost apologetic that the match wasn't a brawl. Like he felt like he had, and to a fair, I think he's right to do that. Like he was trying to explain, like he kept trying to come, and he was coming up with good reasons, like, oh, the title would be better revenge than a brawl. But like, they hyped this match as, like 16 months in the making, and then Gabe is like, I have to figure out why this isn't a brawl. Like, why don't they hate it? Why it's like a slow-paced technical wrestling match.
I mean, it is weird. Like, it is a weird thing. And I sometimes wonder if it was like just a matter of like TNA not wanting Daniels to lose to Punk. Do you think that could have been a part of it?
I don't know. I looked at if you look up Daniel's results on Cage Match, he does jobs to people that to places that are way less high profile and stars that are way less notable than Punk.
Are they WWE contracted employees?
That's why I'm thinking maybe that, or maybe Ring of Honor was too high profile at this point. Maybe they had more restrictions on him there than another place. I don't know. I mean. We know on the last show that it seems like TNA had to be made happy by, the interference and Daniels not tapping, just passing out to Matt Hardy. And that was an example of a contracted WWE guy versus Daniels. So yeah, maybe there is something to that. Yeah. Or maybe they just felt like Daniels is a big star and he's going to be sticking around here for a while. And we don't want Punk to beat another guy, on the way out, because they just had him beat Strong and Lethal. And
yeah, I don't remember how Daniels gets eliminated in the 4-way at the next show. I have to keep an eye on that and see what happens there. But I do feel like there's repetition. Like there are like some big pops for things that I wouldn't expect for there to be pops for. Like there's a crossface spot that Daniels gets on like in the middle of the match. Like it's a pretty big pop, even though it wasn't really built to like a finish. I was like, okay, well, I guess they do have the crowd in the palm of their hands in some ways. Meanwhile, at one point, Gabe says, no physical pain would hurt as much as the mental pain knowing you lost a match like this to your top rival for the world title. And I kind of thought, like, can it be both? Can't you hurt your opponent while winning the world title? But, I don't know. But yeah, I did notice early that it was weird because I'd sort of forgotten about the ref bump spot when I watched it again. And I did think it was weird that Mike Keener was in there for the main event because he's never in there for the world title matches. Yeah. It's always Sinclair. And I was like, oh, that should have been obvious to me. Like, there's going to be a bump and Sinclair's going to come out. Like, and of course he did. He was there to finish. And actually, it's also another clever way to make the refs not have to work 60 minutes in a match. Yeah. Like, so that's good. And I do think when I was talking about Danger before, I do think she did a really good job of keeping the crowd in the match at different points. And like, you could see her on the outside, like banging the mat and getting the crowd going. And I think she was very effective in that role. So I do not think that it was like that she's like, just taking up space out there. Like, I'm annoyed that she's like, they've kind of gutted her character, but she still works hard and does a good job when she's out there. At least so far. I did think it was funny though, when she was trying to wake up Keener and then just got frustrated at him. Like, and everyone was just like, we need a referee. And I'm like, I know this is just like the oldest wrestling thing in the book, but I never really get to talk about it because they don't have ref bumps in ROH. But isn't it really funny, like to this day, that in wrestling, when a referee gets knocked unconscious, nobody reacts. Nobody's like, oh no, like this is a crisis. Like, it's just like, who's going to count the pinfall? Let's run past this unconscious man. Like, it's just like, right? Like, could you imagine? Like, I'm just stating the most obvious thing in the world, but like in a sport, if an official gets knocked unconscious and like everyone just leaves him lying there, another referee just comes out and like takes his place. Just so, because the important thing is that you finish the contest, right?
Yeah, especially when like a ref bump, usually like a lot of times it requires the guy selling for like 3 minutes sometimes on these. And it's like, if someone's knocked unconscious for like more than a few seconds, like at that point it becomes incredibly frightening. Like,
yes.
Is he dead? And everyone just goes, oh no, he's just forget about that. Clotheslines are happening.
Yeah. It's like, it was just funny. Like, she was trying to wake up the referee and like she was mad at him. Also, like, but the other parts, like when they have like referees get knocked out and like the wrestler will like take their carcass and like count a pinfall with it, and it's just like, you are all sociopaths. Like, they did not do that in this match, just for the record. But I never get to talk about ref bumps in ROH, so this was my chance to talk about it. Ref bumps were always like my wrestling pet peeve going back to when I was a kid. I just think they're so stupid. Like, this, first of all, what I just said is ridiculous. But also, like, a lot of times when a referee gets knocked out, it's like for something stupid. Like, remember in the Ricky Steamboat versus Randy Savage match? Do you remember how Dave Hebner gets knocked out? Where it's like, there's like a reversed Irish whip into the corner, and like one of the guys gets whipped into Hebner, who then turns around and bonks his head into the top turnbuckle and falls down. And it's just like so absurd. And the guy's like completely unconscious, and it's just so stupid. Ref bumps are really stupid. And one of the things I loved about ROH was that they did not have them. So you can see why I was very annoyed when on my third ever ROH show they have a big ref bump in the main event. But that said,
oh God, I've missed the peak of Ring of Honor. I came just for the end of it.
That's sort of how I felt. Like, it really was. I was like, what the fuck did I just walk into? But that said, the final part, once Sinclair is in, I think is pretty good. They go for a superplex, and Punk sells his neck after and gets a delayed 2 count. Then the big reaction for the Koji clutch. And Prazak points out that Daniels has worked over Punk's neck the whole time to build up to it. And Punk struggles and makes the ropes. And when he finally gets there, I have a really nice touch. Punk yells, "Oh my God!" as he grabs the ropes. I thought that was pretty cool. And then Daniels comes back with a flurry of headbutts. And fortunately, he doesn't overdo it like AJ does. Punk is like selling his neck for the whole stretch. And we're up to at this point, it's the 55-minute mark. And Punk goes up top, yells, "Best moonsault ever," and then hits a split-legged moonsault. But Daniels gets his feet up. He hits a crossbody, gets a near fall. Then Punk grabs his legs, tries to get a win with his feet on the ropes. Daniels kicks out. Punk tries to get a roll-up holding the tights. Daniels kicks out. Punk gets a quick small package for 2. And then Daniels gets the Uranagi, the best moonsault ever, but he can't cover because he's grabbing his stomach, and Punk grabs on the Anaconda Vice, and the crowd goes nuts. And Daniels is in that hold for a long time, and he gets his foot on the bottom ropes, and then Punk just locks it back on again, and Daniels tries to reverse, and Punk locks it in again, and it's a great struggle. Daniels keeps fighting. He's working hard. Danger's working hard on the outside to keep the crowd involved, and she's great. And Daniels keeps his arm from dropping the 3rd time, and he tries to knee his way out of the hold, and he keeps struggling, and it's probably too long, but it's okay. And he tries to do almost like an Undertaker sit-up, and he stands up. And I was like, after he's been in this hold for so long, it kind of buries the hold a little bit that he just then eventually just stands up out of it. But then I was like, you know what? Punk's leaving anyway. You might as well bury his finisher. And Daniels...
He's going to get a new one anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Although he does use the Anaconda Vice for the first little while. But Daniels gets a jackknife pin for 2, and that's when Cruz announces the 1 minute left, and they trade a few more roll-ups, and Daniels tries to get the Angel's wings, and he finally gets it at like the very last second, and time runs out. And the last 10 minutes were very good, honestly. They really were very dramatic. But I don't think either guy's going to point to this match as one of their best. But I really do think it was a solid addition to the title reign. And it was told a good story. The announcers did a good job of getting it over. It was definitely much better on DVD than it was live, definitely. And I still think it was a missed opportunity that they didn't get to do their brawl, because I think they could have had a really good one.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, to me, the worst 60-minute match we've seen in Ring of Honor so far, but it's still a good match, and I think it's always an accomplishment to have a good 60-minute match. Not that, I mean, I don't like the idea of doing 60 minutes just to do 60 minutes, but, it takes skill. You have to have the cardio, you have to have the pacing, you have to be able to have enough stuff to fill the time, although, as you mentioned, they ended up repeating some stuff to fill time here. But still, not everyone can do a 60-minute match, and not that every wrestler should need to have that ability. But, it is an accomplishment that they were able to have a match that I enjoyed that went that long. But, I mean, where I will say this match fails is, like, what made the Joe Punk matches special, I felt like, was there was a story there that made the 60 minutes make sense. Like, it felt like those matches had to be 60 minutes. And there was a reason in the match why they were at 60 minutes in storyline, where it was Punk using these headlocks, trying to tire Joe out and get him to go Joe to have matches that were longer than he had ever wrestled before, and all this stuff. Likewise, like the 4-corner world title Iron Man match in crowning a champion, has a story that was built around there needed to be 3 falls to set up a really good story in that match. And even like the 2 out of 3 falls match that went over 70 minutes, Aries and Danielson, that's 2 out of 3 falls. Even though I think we both agreed the match probably would have been better if it was a bit shorter, they still had 3 falls to work with, and it was kind of the point of that match was to be long. This match, I feel, is like the first 60-minute match that we've seen in Ring of Honor where it feels like it's being long just to be a 60-minute draw. Like it's not special because they're not really. It just feels like a longer version of the match they would have had, except without the brawling. Even
Yeah, they could have done that final sequence in a shorter match, and it would have been epic. As it was just like a really good way to end a match that could have been better.
The other couple things I want to point out, Punk does a really bad, so bad it's good, Ric Flair strut. Like, people make fun of Punk's top rope elbows. You should see his Ric Flair or Jackie Fargo strut, because it's almost like Elaine dancing on Seinfeld. It's not good, but it was funny to see. And also,
well, now, Punk, if you're listening, which you're not, now you have to at some point in AEW do the Elaine dance from Seinfeld. At some point, work it in.
That should be the first dance.
That's right, the first dance. Well, you did it. End the show. End the show for good. You can't top that one.
Yeah, but so the one other thing that bugged me about this match, it's an obvious, like it's a pet peeve I've talked about with Punk before. He's one of the most obvious spot callers in the business, but this one is egregious even by his standards. So you talked about there's that point late in the match where Daniels is down from a spot and Punk goes best moonsault ever, and he does like an Arabian press to Daniels. Well, if you notice, at the point of the match, he's walking towards the turnbuckle. I think he's got like his back to Daniels, and then he realizes, oh, I've got to call this spot. He turns around, drops to his hands and knees, puts his head right by Daniels' head, clearly tells him the spot, then immediately pops up and does the spot. Like he goes from like a standing position ready to do the spot to like dropping down just so he can talk to Daniels. Like it is the most egregious spot call I have maybe ever seen, and it is like Punk is such a talented wrestler, and he does stuff, and he was just so fascinating because he would also occasionally do things like that where you would feel like I've seen guys in wrestling, fresh out of wrestling school, that would not do something that blatant, but it was amazing. But going back to the Observer, they had some other notes. I kind of just tried to read the notes from the bit that were about the match, but he has some more overall notes from this finish and everything. Let me see if I can find them. Let me just see here quickly. I'll go back. Gabe Sapolsky felt that they needed the screw jobs to get some heels over, and felt Philadelphia was an okay place to do it because Kenta Kobashi's on the next show. So he figured everyone would come back. It felt last week like they played the Punk not losing the title card 1 week too long. This crowd was strong for Philadelphia, at least as it pertained to the walk-up, which was much larger than for the previous few shows. The reactions of those there seemed to echo that feeling. Punk is now again announced for his final matches with the promotion, and by this point it's gone from a cool angle to the boy who called wolf, Dave said. Dave did not say the boy who cried wolf, the boy who called wolf, which I found funny. For a 4-way on August 12th, where he defends against Daniels, James Gibson, and Samoa Joe, followed by a match on August 13th for a singles match against Colt Cabana. Punk wasn't booed as much as you'd think, but Daniels was clearly the favorite. Crowd also hated the ref bump, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. He went into that. Let me just see here. Then Dave goes, very negative reaction to the finish. The idea was that this may be Punk's last 60-minute match ever. Punk hit Daniels and Gibson with post-match belt shots. Joe came out and did some Shinya Hashimoto moves on Punk and did the Hashimoto pose. Joe cut a promo saying he wouldn't let Vince McMahon buy his life and wouldn't let Punk take the belt to WWE. Noble said he wanted another shot being world champion because Ring of Honor gave him a chance to be something more than a cruiserweight stuck on a B show. So here's the funny thing about that. I'll get into it in a second. We do see the run-ins. We don't get any of those promos, and it is kind of hilarious that we got basically Joe and or Gibson saying things that come true for them. Like, Joe's like, oh, I won't let Vince McMahon buy my life, and Gibson like, I won't be a cruiserweight on a B show. It's like, well, you will and you will, actually. But
yeah.
We'll go to the pre-W torch quickly. Ring of Honor promoter and booker Gabe Sapolsky says he was pleased with Punk vs. Daniels and the entire Philadelphia show. This was one of my favorite shows, and we accomplished a lot of things, he tells The Torch. The next few months will be very interesting. Christopher Daniels vs. CM Punk was a great match with a real old-school element in it. It was a completely different than the other long matches we've done, in that this match had a very strong, old-school-inspired heel and face element. We started a lot of things last Saturday. Then the Torch continued, some recent match finishes have been met with catcalls and criticism from longtime Ring of Honor fans. Ring of Honor originally featured almost exclusively clean finishes and no interference from ringside. More and more often in recent months, finishes resemble what has been more traditionally common in major national promotions. Sapolsky defends the change of booking policy while not blaming the fans for being upset with the change. Quote, I don't blame the fans at all, he tells The Torch. The heels won by cheating, and that isn't supposed to make them happy. Everything we did on Saturday will lead to something, and in retrospect, this will become a historic show. I will say that the fans all got their money's worth, and that is one thing you can always count on in Ring of Honor, is that you will get more than your money's worth when you come to a Ring of Honor event. One source in Ring of Honor believes that the number of negative reviews for Ring of Honor's The Homecoming, which was held in Philadelphia last Saturday, will come full circle. Ring of Honor feels it had a number of strong shows lately. The feeling within Ring of Honor is that you have to have some problems before there is a need to find solutions, and some fans being miffed at some of the things at one show isn't seen as a problem at this point. Ring of Honor is trying several different angles to see what Ring of Honor fans will and will not take to. Ring of Honor isn't looking to become a sports entertainment company, but is simply trying different angles to gauge what Ring of Honor fans will tolerate. Ring of Honor is taking the stance that if these angles don't work, they will be revised or dropped altogether. So, yeah, I'm not going to read it, but there was a live report that Torch published where this fan just tore into the show, and he was like, Gabe has lost his touch, the fans are going to turn on the product, all this stuff. And there were some people that were very much angry that this was a Ring of Honor show where you had 3 straight heel wins with outside interference, followed by a draw that was basically a heel win because it was Punk getting his title belt back that Daniels had discovered. And you know, I have a higher tolerance for outside interference, but I get why fans would be mad by basically a show where the top half of the card was nothing but downer heel triumphs and interference. I can understand that.
I have a surprise for you. I have my own email that I sent to a friend right after this show with my immediate day after live reaction to attending this show.
Wow.
Would you like to hear it?
Yes, I would, sir.
All right, so this is me in an email to a friend. I said, as for last night's show, I actually left with a really sour taste in my mouth. After becoming practically ROH obsessed for the past month and a half, the bloom came off the rose last night when I realized that they, too, can have a night of really lousy booking. 3 straight screwjob heel wins in big matches, and then a 1-hour draw that featured a ref bump with a crowd that clearly did not want that finish. As far as the 60-minute match itself, I have to say it really just wasn't all that great. It'll probably seem pretty good on DVD with the announcers there to fill in any gaps, but it really didn't have an apparent story to it, and there were various points where they just repeated spots that they had done earlier. Not with any sense of escalation either. It was more just, oh, they're doing that again? There was this one thing where they exchanged punches for a while with the crowd going, yay, when Daniels would hit, and boo, when Punk would hit. And then eventually Daniels hit a few in a row, whipped Punk into the ropes, and hit a backdrop. They did that sequence at least 3 times. I assume it was just because they knew it got a reaction, which not everything did. Also, the atmosphere at the show was lousy compared to the 2 Manhattan shows that I've been to. More younger teenagers and little kids with their parents. It was yeah, I know. It was definitely a letdown in that regard, since the atmosphere was one of my favorite things about the shows that I've been to, especially the 7-9 one. That was Escape from New York, which I really hope translates to the DVD. Overall, if this screwy booking style doesn't become a trend, I'll probably find the show far less irritating on DVD, as there were some good matches on it. Joe, Gibson, and Lethal versus the Rottweilers was borderline great, so that's something to look forward to. But it definitely wasn't as fun as the other ROH experiences that I've had.
I think it's fascinating that you basically called this podcast with one of those last lines where you were like, oh, if this doesn't become a trend, I'll probably like this better on DVD. Like, you basically wrote a letter to yourself, Matt. I think that's kind of crazy, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I think it, like, not to pat myself on the back, but I do think I turned out to be right about a lot of different aspects as far as like, the 60-minute match being better with commentary, and the finishes being a lot less irritating when you know that they're not a trend. And I do think, it's an overreact. Like, for me, it was more like I was just so new to it that I was like, it was just sort of like, I guess a little bit like disenchanting to know that they weren't perfect. It just felt like, oh my God, this is just perfect. Everything I ever dreamed of with wrestling booking. And then you watch it and you're like, oh no, there's actually some times that they do stuff I don't like also. And so, like, I think that's why I reacted that way. But I do think in retrospect, it's sort of like, all right, calm down. It's one event. You know what I mean? One event matters more when they're trying to sell every single one, like for $20, but still, it's just one event. It doesn't mean that everything's changing. And if you actually go forward, ROH's booking does not change that much. You know what I mean? Like, they're still ROH, and they still will be for a long time.
I'll read a little excerpt from Dennis Smith's Torch Live report. I just want to say this because that email was hardly alone, and it was far from the harshest, because I saw a few reports, and this one, here's just a couple choice quotes. Unfortunately, the cracks in Gabe Sapolsky's booking are really starting to show. The crowd left majorly pissed off. I read some reports about last week's show in Connecticut where people were arguing that if the crowd was pissed or if it was just a few frustrated fans. I can attest to the fact that this crowd was pissed and vocal about it. And then that's how he starts his review. He does a review that basically complains the whole way through. And then he ends with let me just see here. The crowd left pissed at the finish and at the proliferation of bullshit finishes in what was supposed to be a clean finish type of promotion. Ring of Honor is losing its magical touch with its audience because Gabe Sapolsky is no longer listening to his crowd. And so, there were some people that were mad about this, but I will say Ring of Honor was doing more heel interference and outside, interference spots than they had ever done before. And I do think ending a show with 4 straight kind of heel wins in a sense, and 3 of them being outside interference, that is egregious for any show, probably too far. But I will say people were overreacting because obviously this wasn't going to be a crazy thing that was going to be a huge trend and ruin the shows. And I also think sometimes people, when they talk about early Ring of Honor, it was more cleaner than this era of Ring of Honor, but I think people exaggerate. Like, they act like every Ring of Honor match right from the start was no faces, no heels, no interference, no cheating ever. Like, when Low Ki was the first Ring of Honor World Champion, he lost the title in the first year on his second title defense to Xavier when Christopher Daniels interfered. Like, and there was cheating. Like, that was a world title change on interference. And so it's not like this never happened. It just never happened this much.
Right, 4 in a row. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, remember Jody Fleisch versus Red, how mad everyone was at that? This was like that, like, several matches in a row.
Yeah.
I mean, not exactly, because they didn't actually cut the match short, but this is not unprecedented for people to be mad at screwy finishes, and it was a lot of them. But like, when you just look at what comes later, Danielson's title reign, Joe and Kobashi, they're not getting away from their roots. It's like, it's a short-term angle to get to a certain point, and on that level, it looks a lot better. The thing that is funny, though, is that Gabe was like, well, that's okay, because Philly will be able to bounce back because Kobashi's on the next show. But really, if you look, Kobashi's Philly show does better than this, but it doesn't. That's not what brings Philly back up high. It's CZW that brings Philly back for ROH, and it's just interesting. Like, I don't think Gabe would have thought of that at that point, but like, CZW was really what Philadelphia needed to become a hot market for them again.
And also, like, wasn't the previous show in Philly before this one the Trios Tournament, like, yep, that, which is one of the lesser shows of the year. So really, Philly, it was once their home. It was their first market. It was their home base, and they have been taking some hits at this point, and that is probably in part why they needed CZW next year to kind of revitalize that crowd for a while. And
right, for sure. They just had 2 shows in a row that were not super well received by the ROH audience, so they definitely needed to do more than just bring in a special guest, even if that special guest is Kenta Kobashi. But, we'll be talking about that show pretty soon, eventually, so be interested to see how the crowd is on that night.
And also, I just wanted to bring up, I think you brought up something interesting, which was, you were saying, like, the cost of attending live. Like, something I wonder sometimes when we do this show, and I've heard shows that review, like, not wrestling even, but just other things, there's a thing to talk about in the sense of, do your reviews change when you're not paying for something? Like, I bought all these shows when they came out on DVD, but we're not paying for it right now watching it. Like, we've gotten digital files, we've in the early days we broke out DVDs, but we've got digital files now, and I don't feel guilty about that because
we bought all these shows in the first place.
Exactly. I bought all these shows, in the first place. So, as far as I'm concerned,
we own these shows. We paid for them. Yeah.
But there is something where I wonder if sometimes our reviews, like on this show, because you kind of brought that up just now, it made me think of this, or on other shows we reviewed, it's different because we've already paid for them. Like, when we watch them now, we're not paying a second time. And I do feel like your expectations change when when you leave your house to see a wrestling show, or when you've just paid $25 for a ticket or $20 for a DVD and you've waited weeks for it. Like, it's different when we're watching a show. We're rewatching a show we watched over a decade ago. We're not paying any new money to watch it. It's extra entertainment. It's like a bonus on top of what we already paid. And I can understand why, like, a Matt Feuerstein, who was so excited and young and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, why he would have been mad when, like, he leaves his home, he travels to Philadelphia, he pays for a ticket, and this is what he gets, versus him, in 2021 rewatching it for a podcast. Like, your expectations are probably different, right? I mean, you probably are a lower bar to clear to make happy.
Yeah, although I don't appreciate you making fun of my bushy tail. I'm very sensitive about it. But the thing is, like, everyone watching at this point will be watching it 16 years later. Yeah. So, like, in that case, that's really what matters more. Like, we're not doing this podcast for people in 2005.
Exactly.
So I think our context is the more relevant one.
Exactly. But I do think it does explain maybe sometimes why sometimes the live reports can seem harsher, is because, it means more when you're seeing it live and when you're shelling out for a ticket and all that. But
for sure.
Anyway, there's only one segment left on the show. After the match, the crowd chants for 5 more minutes. Punk is handed his title back, which Daniels had been held in hostage. But, of course, it's the ref who held it back because Daniels had to give it up before the start of the match. The crowd keeps chanting bullshit. Allison Danger is tending to Daniels. Punk just walks up to her, grabs her, punches her, leading to Daniels and Punk brawling in the middle of the ring. Punk wins the exchange against Daniels, and so James Gibson runs in for the save to what I would say is shockingly little reaction. Punk hits Gibson and Daniels with the title belt, and the crowd chants for Joe, who quickly comes out wearing a Curryman t-shirt. He lays into Punk with some kicks. Punk very quickly retreats to the floor, and Joe chases him to the back. And it's kind of not a great ending, I would say, in the sense of we've seen this ending a lot, but usually there's some kind of hook for the next show, like, Mick Foley saying you're going to have to defend on the next show, or Gibson, laying out Punk and saying, if you want, you better come fight me on the next show, or Daniels holding the belt hostage. And this time it's just a brawl, and there's no segment, there's no real hook. It's just kind of like, it's over, and here we go.
Yeah, I was waiting for Taz's son Hook to come out too. But yeah, no, like it was a weird ending. Like, there should have been something being like, well, what are we going to do on the next show? Here's something that we might do on the next show. Like, we're just expected to watch the next DVD and suddenly there's a 4-way, but like, I don't know, like, they should be announcing what's on the next show. Like, if you watch the show, you're basically like, okay, well, there's nothing planned for the future. Punk's leaving with the title, and that's the end of the world. Like, there were no matches announced pretty much at all for future shows on these DVDs. So, yeah, I don't think that's the best way to end the show, especially when you have already, that a lot of people have complained about the finish and stuff. It's very weird to leave people hanging with the end of the DVD like that.
I mean, the live show, I don't know how well you remember, but we did go over that just now, the report that said there were promos from Gibson and Joe, but those do not make the DVD. Again, this DVD was right around 3 hours, so that might have literally just been, we need to cut things for time to make it all fit. But
they could have cut entrances and stuff, which they didn't.
Yeah.
Like, it's like they've done that before. It's not unheard of.
And so that brings us to the end of the show. Matt, I think it is not a terrible show. I think the action generally is good up and down the card. Nothing is approaching great. I do think, it's disappointing for the level of talent on the show. And I would say, in my opinion, of all I believe, if we count the Summer of Punk storyline starting at Death Before Dishonor of this year and being a 7-show series, we're on show 5 of that storyline. I do think this is the weakest show of the 5, both in just terms of overall quality and in terms of feeling like a vital part of the storyline, I would say.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's the weakest of those. It's one of the weaker shows of the year, honestly. But still pretty good. Like, I mean, I thought that everything after intermission was very entertaining. I thought pre-intermission was pretty bad, honestly. I didn't like any of the first 3 matches. I mean, I liked the 6-man okay, but didn't hold up great for me, like as far as like in terms of compared to what I thought of it live. And I really hated all the Nana and Jade Chung stuff. Just hated it. So that first half of the show was a big thumbs down for me, but the second half was a pretty big thumbs up, honestly. Like not a huge one, no great matches, but solidly entertaining up and down. And I think in the long term, all the booking was good.
I think I like the first half a bit more than you, but I think mostly we're on the same page. And I think it's 2005 Ring of Honor, where I think the floor has never been higher, and maybe they don't hit the ceiling quite as often, but like even when things are disappointing, they're still fairly good, enjoyable. And even this show, as far as the disappointment goes, I still, like you said, the top half of the show is pretty good, and, that brings us to plugs. If you want to contact us, through the years at gmail.com, THROH for through. We have a thread on the Pro Wrestling Only Plugs forum. If you want to contact us on Twitter, I am at Trevor Dame, D-A-M as in Mother E, and Matt is at Mayor MGF. Same thing, M, not N. Next time on the show, we will be covering Redemption. This is a big one. It's finally, a lot of things are coming to the head. We are entering Punk's final double shot in Ring of Honor. Dayton, Ohio. CM Punk versus James Gibson versus Samoa Joe versus Christopher Daniels for the world title. This is a big one. And on top of that, Homicide wrestles Matt Hardy. We once heard recently Gabe say that you'd have to be an idiot to think the Ring of Honor fans would boo Matt Hardy. Well, we'll find out. Matt, we will find out.
That's right. And if you are embarrassed that you just spent the last 2.5 hours of your day listening to this podcast, you have the right to pretend that you've been spending it reading a very classy book.
Yes, you've been reading Gravity's Rainbow or something. And so until then, keep pretending. And until next time, have a good time. Have a great time.